Welcome back to Potter Eclipse, where tonight we ask a single strange question and follow it all the way down. Today's story: Wednesday Addams saw Harry's abuse in a vision and the whole family came to collect him. If you're new here, take a moment to smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so a story like this one never slips past you. Now let's begin. Chapter 1: The girl who saw the Addams house did not sleep so much as hold its breath. At 4 in the morning, the great pipe organ downstairs settled its bones, and the wind moved through the dead ivy on the eastern wall, and somewhere below the wine cellar the family's pet, a thing with too many opinions and not enough legs, turned over in its trough and sighed. Wednesday Addams lay flat on her bed with her hands folded on her chest in the manner of the recently embalmed, and she did not sleep either. She had been staring at the ceiling for some time. The ceiling had a water stain shaped like a hanged man, which she found soothing, and a crack that ran from the light fixture to the cornice, which she was training to grow. Then the vision came, and the water stain went away, and so did the room. It came the way her visions always came, without permission and without apology. One moment she was counting the cracks in the plaster, and the next she was standing in a place that smelled of floor polish and boiled cabbage and fear. The fear was the loudest thing. Wednesday had a connoisseur's nose for fear. She had cultivated it in her brother for years and had studied its varieties the way other children studied their spelling. This was not the crisp, invigorating fear of a good scare. This was the old kind, the kind that lived in a body so long it stopped being an event and became furniture. She looked because she always looked. That was the discipline of it. Wednesday never turned her face from what the visions showed her. She considered flinching a failure of nerve, and she failed at very little. There was a staircase, ordinary carpet the color of dishwater. Beneath the staircase, where a normal family kept the vacuum cleaner and the broken umbrellas and the boxes of Christmas ornaments they never used, there was a door. It was a small door, sized for something that was meant to stay small. It had a latch on the outside. A latch on the outside of a door meant only one thing, and it meant that thing whether the door led to a pantry or a kennel or a cell, and Wednesday knew the difference between a place where you kept your preserves and a place where you kept a person you had decided not to love. The door opened, not from the inside. Wednesday did not see everything. The visions were merciful in their cruelty. They gave her the shape of a thing and let her fill in the rest, which was always worse, because her imagination had been raised by people who took her to the electric chair museum on her birthday. She saw a thin blanket. She saw a jam jar with a spider in it, kept as a friend, because it was the only living thing in that dark that had never once raised its voice. She saw a pair of glasses mended at the bridge with tape gone yellow and brittle, and behind the glasses she saw eyes that were the wrong kind of quiet. The eyes were green, green as the bottle glass grandmama kept her tinctures in, green as the light that came off certain graves in the good part of the cemetery on a wet night. The child in the cupboard did not cry. That was the part that lodged in her like a fish hook, the part she would carry down to breakfast and would not be able to put down. He did not cry because he had learned that crying was a sound, and sounds got you noticed, and being noticed was the worst thing that could happen to him. So he sat very still in the dark with his spider and his broken glasses, and he made himself into nothing, and he had gotten so good at it that the vision itself struggled to hold him, kept trying to look away from him the way his own family looked away from him, and Wednesday had to reach into the dark and pin the vision open with both hands to keep watching. She heard a voice from above the cupboard, muffled through the stairs. A woman's voice, sharp and thin, the voice of someone who had made a religion out of her own tidiness. Then a man's voice, heavy and wet and pleased with itself. Then a third voice, younger, whining, demanding, a voice that had never once been told no and had grown fat and cruel in the absence of the word. The three voices moved around above the child in the cupboard like whether he could not go outside of. And the child under the stairs pressed his forehead to his knees and breathed in and out, careful and small, and waited for the house to forget he was in it, which it did every single day and which was the closest thing to mercy he had. Then Wednesday saw the last thing. The vision always saved one thing for last, the way a good executioner saves the good rope. On the child's forehead, half hidden under a fall of black hair that no one had ever cut with any kindness, there was a scar. Thin and pale and shaped like a stroke of lightning or like a crack she might have trained to grow across a ceiling. It was old, it had been there since before the cupboard, and when she looked at it, the scar looked back, and something behind it that was not the child stirred in its sleep and did not wake, and the cold that came off it was a different cold than the cold of the house. It was patient, it was waiting for the child to grow into it. Wednesday had felt a great many terrible things looking at her out of the dark, and she had learned to tell the difference between a thing that wanted to frighten you and a thing that wanted to use you, and the thing behind the scar wanted to use him, and it was in no hurry at all. Wednesday came back to her body all at once, the way you surface from deep water, and the water stain was above her again, and the crack in the plaster, and the ordinary dark of her own good and well-loved room. She lay still for a moment. She was 11 years old, and she had seen a great many things she was not supposed to see, and she had trained herself to receive them without shaking. She did not shake now. but she noticed that her hands, folded on her chest, had closed into fists sometime during the vision, and that her fingernails had left 4 small crescents in each palm, and that she had not felt it happen. She uncurled them and studied the marks with mild professional interest. The sight had come to her first when she was 5, at the funeral of a great aunt whom nobody had liked and everybody had come to see off with genuine feeling. She had looked into the open grave and seen, quite clearly, the man 3 rows back who would fill the next one, and when she had told him because it seemed only polite, he had not thanked her. People rarely did. Over the years, the sight had shown her small deaths and large ones, the location of lost things and the guilt of found ones, the winning horse and the losing marriage, and she had learned to hold all of it at the same even distance, the way you learn to hold a snake behind the head so the biting end can rage all it likes and never reach you. She held everything at that distance. It was how she stayed upright, but the child in the cupboard would not go to the distance where she kept things. He sat in the front of her mind with his spider and his taped glasses and refused to be filed with the winning horses and the open graves, and she understood, lying there with the crescents fading from her palms, why. The sight had not shown her a death this time. It had shown her a life going quietly out like a candle in a sealed jar for one of anyone to cup a hand around it. That was a thing and Addams did something about. Then she got up and she did not put on her slippers, because the cold of the floorboards was honest and she liked honest things, and she went to find her mother. Morticia Addams was awake, because Morticia Addams was always awake at the hours when the house was most itself. She sat in the conservatory among the roses she grew for their thorns and pruned for their blooms, snipping the buds off the stems with a pair of silver scissors and letting the naked, perfect thorns stand. A single black candle burned on the little iron table beside her. The glass panes of the conservatory were furred with the breath of the night, and beyond them the grounds went down in tiers of dead garden and standing water to the low wall in the family cemetery, where the good marble caught what little there was of the moon. She did not turn when her daughter came in. She had heard the particular silence of Wednesday's bare feet on the stairs, and she knew the weight of it. "You've had one," Morticia said. It was not a question. She set down her scissors. "Sit with me, little raven, tell your mother what the dark showed you." Wednesday came and stood at her mother's shoulder rather than sitting, which Morticia noted, because Wednesday sat for pleasant news and stood for the other kind. Up close she was very pale, and her 2 black braids hung down like plumb lines, and her eyes were the color of a river under ice. "There is a boy," Wednesday said. "There are a great many boys," said Morticia, with the faint distaste of a woman for whom the general run of boys had always been a disappointment. "Most of them recover from it. What of this one? He lives in a cupboard." Wednesday said it flatly, how she said everything, and the flatness was the thing that made Morticia go still. "Under the stairs, there is a latch on the outside of the door. They feed him when they remember. He has a spider in a jar, and he keeps it because it is the only thing in the house that has never been cruel to him. He is perhaps 6. He has a scar on his forehead shaped like lightning, and there is something inside him that is not him, sleeping, and behind all of it his eyes are green, and he has taught himself not to cry because crying gets him noticed." The black candle guttered. The roses stood in their pot with their buds cut away, all thorn, and said nothing. Morticia Addams had buried 3 husbands who were not Gomez, and had danced on more graves than she could remember, and had raised 2 children in the confident faith that the world was a wicked and delicious place best met with a straight spine and a sharp knife. Very little moved her. She had made a study of being unmoved. It was, she felt, the foundation of good posture. But she had also spent 11 years learning to read the smallest weather of her daughter's face, and she saw now the thing under Wednesday's stillness, which was not fear, because Wednesday did not fear, and was not grief, because the Addamses did not grieve for the living. It was something colder and better than either. It was the calm a hawk gets when it has finally, after long patience, seen the field mouse move. "You saw where?" Morticia said. "Not clearly. There was a street. The houses were all the same." Wednesday's mouth turned down at one corner, a movement of profound revulsion. "Mother, they were all the same door, the same window, the same little square of grass cut to the same little length, row after row of them. It was the most frightening thing I have ever seen." "Sameness is a kind of death," Morticia agreed gravely, "but they lack the courage to lie down for it. Go on. He is inside one of them, a cupboard in one of them. And the people who put him there sleep upstairs in soft beds and think themselves good." Morticia rose. She rose how she did everything, without haste and without effort, and she was very tall in her long black gown that fit her like water fits a well, and the candlelight ran up her and did not reach her eyes. She put one cool white hand against her daughter's cheek, and Wednesday allowed it, which she did for almost no one. "You did well to come to me," Morticia said softly. "You always look. It is the finest thing about you that you never turn your face from what wants to be seen. Now, we shall wake your father. He so hates to be left out of a rescue." "Mother," Wednesday caught her sleeve. The black fabric was cold. "He is mine. I found him. I don't want the others deciding he is a project or a pet or a thing to be argued over at the table. I saw him." Morticia looked down at the fierce little hand fisted in her sleeve, and something in her face that was not quite a smile arranged itself, because a smile would have been too warm and would have embarrassed them both. "Of course he is yours," she said. "You saw him. Nothing in this house is more binding than that, but an Addams is never rescued by one Addams, Kara. We are not so mean with our love. You will have him. And you will share the collecting of him with the whole family, because a boy who has been taught he is worth nothing must be taken up by so many hands at once that he can never again quite believe it. Do you understand?" Wednesday considered this with the seriousness she brought to all things, then she let go of her mother's sleeve. "Yes," she said, "that is efficient, and crueler to the people who kept him, which is a bonus." "That," said Morticia, gliding to the door, "is my girl." Gomez Addams was informed of the situation at 4:20 in the morning, and his response was to fall out of bed. This was not distress, it was enthusiasm, which in Gomez looked much the same and often ended in the same bruises. Him up off the floor in his crimson dressing gown with his mustache already trembling and his eyes already wet, a man built entirely of appetites, chief among them the appetite for his wife, closely followed by the appetite for a righteous and preferably dangerous cause. "A child," he said, "in a cupboard. Querida, tell me I heard you wrongly. Tell me my ears, worn out with age and cigars and the constant music of your voice, have deceived me." "You heard correctly, mon cher," said Morticia. "A cupboard." Gomez's face did something complicated. He had been a boisterous and much tormented child himself, and he remembered his tormenting with deep nostalgia and gratitude, because it had been done by people who loved him, which made all the difference. There was a torment that built you and a torment that hollowed you out, and Gomez, for all his theatrical madness, had never once confused the two. And the people who did this, they live, currently. They go on living in their house under their roof, having done this. "For now," said Wednesday from the doorway. Gomez turned and saw his daughter standing there in the dark hall, barefoot and grave, and he crossed the room and went down on one knee before her, which put his mustache roughly level with her chin, and he took both her small, cold hands in his large, warm ones. "You saw him," he said. "A little storm cloud saw him and came straight to your mother, and now we will all of us go and fetch him, and he will never sit in the dark again unless he wants to, in which case we have a superb dark, the finest dark in 3 counties. We will show him the good dark." He kissed both her hands with tremendous gravity. "You have done a magnificent thing, Mija. You have found us a boy to keep." "I don't know that he'll want keeping," Wednesday said. "He has been taught that wanting anything is dangerous." Gomez's eyes brimmed. "Then we shall unteach him," he declared, rising, gently and with fencing lessons. He seized a saber from the wall. There was always a saber on the wall in the Addams house. On every wall it was a point of pride, and cut the air with it twice joyously. "Lurch, lurch, wake the house, wake Fester, wake mother, wake the ones in the attic we don't discuss. We ride at dawn." From somewhere in the depths of the house, a sound answered him like a foghorn falling downstairs. That was Lurch agreeing. By 5:30, the family had assembled in the great hall, which was a room built to make ordinary people feel their own insignificance and to make the Addamses feel at home. A fire the color of infection burned in a hearth big enough to roast an ox or an enemy. The mounted heads of things that had never existed looked down from the walls with expressions of mild regret. Things sat on the newel post of the grand staircase, drumming its fingers. It was, at that hour, the only member of the household who had gotten a full night's rest, being a hand and needing very little. Uncle Fester arrived last, wrapped in a moth-eaten fur that might once have been a bear and might once have been an ant, his round white face lit from beneath by a torch he had lit for the occasion, and this being Fester, partly for the flavor. He looked around the assembled family with the frank delight of a man who had been promised a treat and had not yet been told what it was. "Is it a funeral?" he asked hopefully. "Did somebody finally, a rescue?" said Morticia. Fester's face fell, then reassembled itself into cautious optimism. "Will there be screaming from the correct people?" said Gomez. "Yes." "Oh, good." Fester settled himself onto a coffin that served the family as a bench and hugged his knees. "I like a rescue." Nobody appreciates a rescue anymore. It's all revenge, revenge, revenge. Where's the artistry? Pugsley Addams came down the stairs at a run, which was how Pugsley did stairs, and arrived among them faintly singed, because he had paused on the way to check on an experiment, and the experiment had voted against him. He was a solid, cheerful boy, built like a small barrel and blessed with a temperament that had survived 6 years of being his sister's test subject, and kept coming back for more. He surveyed the hall, counted the sabers, noted the picnic basket that clanked, and correctly deduced that something excellent was underway. "Are we killing someone?" he asked, with the bright hope of a boy who had been promised very little for the summer. "We are collecting someone," said Wednesday. Pugsley's face, which had risen, dropped a courteous inch and then rose again, because collecting was nearly as good as killing and frequently led to it. "Who?" "A boy. I saw him. He lives in a cupboard, and his family is cruel to him in the boring way, the way with no imagination in it." Wednesday regarded her brother with the flat, assessing gaze she otherwise reserved for deciding where to aim. "He is mine. I found him. But mother says an Addams is never collected by one Addams, so you may help." Pugsley weighed the offer with the gravity it deserved. He and his sister had spent their whole lives in a condition of affectionate warfare, and he understood better than anyone what it cost her to say the word may, which in Wednesday's mouth was as near to please as her language ran. Is he going to be my brother? Probably. Do I have to share my crossbow? No, you have to share your parents, your grandmother, your uncle, the hand, the butler, the cemetery, and the second best dungeon. She paused. Not the crossbow. He'll want his own. His aim will be terrible at first. He has never been allowed to break anything. Pugsley took this in. Somewhere inside his cheerful barrel of a chest a thing turned over because he too remembered the winter of the governess, the 11 days, the way a person could stop expecting things and go quiet. He had not known his sister had watched him do it. He looked at her now and understood that she had and had remembered and had built an entire rescue out of the remembering. Okay, he said. He can have the second best dungeon. I'll clear out the mannequins. A thought arrived and improved him considerably. Can I be the one who frightens the cruel family? I've been practicing my face. You may all frighten the cruel family, said Morticia serenely. I insist upon it. It is educational. Fester raised his hand from the coffin. I have a question and it's a serious one, he said, and for once he looked as though he meant it. This boy, when he sees us. All of us together, coming up the path in the daylight. He gestured vaguely at the collected family, the fur and the torch and the moving basket and the butler like a standing storm. What if we frighten him, not the cruel family, him? What if we're the scariest thing that's ever come to his door and he thinks we've come to make it worse? The hall went quiet. It was, everyone silently agreed, the single most intelligent thing Fester had said since the incident with the transformer, and it deserved an answer. Wednesday gave it. He won't be frightened of us, she said. He spent his whole life among people who look perfectly ordinary and are rotten all the way through. He'll see us and understand at once that we're the opposite. We look terrible and we're safe. That's the only kind of safe he'll be able to trust, because it's the only kind that never lied to him. She looked at her uncle, and something in her flat regard softened by a single degree. But it was a good question, Uncle Fester. Keep having those, they suit you. Fester beamed and put a light bulb in his mouth to celebrate, and it glowed, and nobody remarked on it because it would have been rude. Grandmama came in from the kitchen wing then, and the family made room for her the way water makes room for stone. She was small and bent and ancient beyond the reach of any calendar, and she had a face like a walnut that had seen things, and she trailed the smell of her workroom behind her, which was a smell of scorched herbs and river bottom and something underneath that the polite did not name. She had a wooden bowl in her hands, and in the bowl was a black liquid that turned when nobody stirred it. Somebody's had a sight, she announced, in the manner of a woman who had smelled it on the air the way another might smell rain. Her sharp black eyes went straight to Wednesday and stayed there, bright and sharp and not unkind. Well, girl, don't stand there like a good child. Tell your grandmother. What did the dark cough up for you? So Wednesday told it again, and she told it the same way each time, without adding and without softening, because a true thing did not need dressing, and by the fourth telling the whole family had it entire. The cupboard, the latch on the outside, the three cruel voices, the spider in the jar, the taped glasses, the green eyes, the scar, and the thing behind the scar that slept and did not wake. And with each telling the fire burned a little lower and a little colder, and by the end the great hall was quiet. In a way the great hall was almost never quiet, because the Addams family held exactly one thing sacred, and it was not a god, and it was not a country, and it was not any law that men had written down. It was this: you did not do that to a child. You could do a great many other things. You could raise your children among nightshade and open graves. You could teach your daughter the properties of poisons and your son the joy of the guillotine, and let them play at maiming each other in the yard until the streetlights came on. You could keep a disembodied hand as a member of the family, and a monster in the cellar, and a butler who groaned instead of spoke. The Addamses did all of this and considered it not merely acceptable but loving, because every strange and dreadful thing they did together, and they did it with the children folded warm in the middle of it, wanted, chosen, seen. That was the whole of it. That was the only law. A child could grow up in a house full of spiders and be the safest child alive so long as the house wanted him. And a child could grow up in a clean white house with a mowed lawn and a soft bed 6 feet above his head, and starve if the house did not. The Dursleys' house, Wednesday had said, was the most frightening thing she had ever seen. She had not meant the dark of the cupboard. She had meant the sameness of the street, and the softness of the beds, and the fact that from the outside you could not tell. That was the true horror, and the Addamses, who trafficked in horror the way other families trafficked in casseroles, recognized a masterwork when they heard one described. So, said Grandmama at last, setting her bowl on the great table with a small definite sound, you want him found, properly found, mind, not that street-end-to-feeling business. You want a road to his door. We do, said Morticia. Then somebody give me a coal off that fire and quiet, and you. Grandmama pointed a crooked finger at Wednesday without looking at her. You stand by me, girl, because it's your sight in the bowl, and the water won't show a stranger what it'll show its own. Come, put your hands where mine are and don't let go whatever swims up. Can you do that? I have watched worse things than a bowl of water, said Wednesday, and came and put her small pale hands on the wooden rim beside her grandmother's wrinkled brown ones. The finding was not a loud thing. Wednesday had half expected a loud thing. Some crackle of green fire of the kind Fester was always setting off in the yard for the atmosphere. But real craft, the old kind, the kind Grandmama had carried down out of a country that no longer had a name on any map, was as quiet as a held breath. Grandmama dropped the coal into the bowl and it did not hiss. She murmured to the water in a language older than English and older than the family and possibly older than the idea of families, and the black surface went smooth as a coffin lid, and then it went clear, and then it showed them things. It showed them the street of identical houses, seen from above as a bird might see it, or a thing with wings that was not quite a bird, row on row, curtain twitching, lawn proud, sleeping in its own tidiness. Wednesday's stomach turned and she made herself watch, because she had promised the dark she would always look. The water narrowed. One house came up out of the rest, no different from its neighbors, which was the whole indictment. Number 4. A word swam up under the image and settled. Privet Drive. A hedge, a car in the drive, washed to a shine. A hanging basket of flowers by the door, plastic, so that not even the flowers were permitted to die honestly. And then the water went down through the roof and the soft beds and the landing and the dishwater carpet, down to the space beneath the stairs, and there it stopped, and there, curled in the small dark that was too small for him, was the child. The whole family had gathered close around the bowl without seeming to move, the way crows gather, and not one of them made a sound. Gomez had his hand pressed flat over his own heart. Fester had taken off his hat. Even Thing, perched on the edge of the table, had gone still, its fingers folded. The child in the water shifted in his sleep, his lips moved, and the water, which showed the sight and sometimes, if it liked you, gave you sound, gave them this. The child asleep in the dark, saying a single word, small and worn smooth with use, the way you'd wear a stone smooth by carrying it in your pocket for years and taking it out to look at when things were bad. Please, said the child in the cupboard, to no one, to the dark, to a spider in a jar, and then quieter, already sinking back down into sleep. Sorry, he was apologizing in his sleep to no one for existing. Gomez made a sound low in his chest that had no words in it. Fester turned the torch away so no one would see his face. Pugsley, who broke things for a hobby and had never in his life wanted to unbreak one, discovered that he wanted to unbreak this and did not know what to do with the wanting and stood there holding it. Grandmama took her hands off the bowl and the water went black again and the child was gone from it, though not from any of them, not now, not ever again. The old woman sat back on her stool and looked for a moment, every one of her uncountable years. She had brewed poisons that could stop a regiment and hexes that could curdle a bloodline, and she had done it all with a cackle and a wink, because to Grandmama the whole business of the world was a marvelous dark joke, and the only sensible response to it was to laugh. She was not laughing now. His name is Harry, she said. Her voice had gone rough. That much the water gave me plain, Harry. And there's more to him than a cupboard, a great deal more old blood in him and older grief, and a name folded up inside his name that the water wouldn't say out loud, which means it's a name that people are afraid of, which means our Harry is somebody, whether those swine under his stairs know it or not. She looked up and her black eyes had gone very bright. There's a whole other country pressed up against this one, you understand, closer than the wallpaper, and that boy was born on the far side of it. I can smell it on him even in the water, wands and towers and long grudges. Somebody over there made a terrible mistake with this child or told a terrible lie about him, and then they hid him in the dullest hole they could find and hoped nobody would come looking. She bared her old teeth, and nobody did. For 6 years nobody did. Well, we're nobody. Let them make of that what they like. And the thing behind his scar, Wednesday said. It was the closest she came to asking for anything. That's real, that's not a metaphor, and it's not a bad dream. Something got into that child a long time ago and set up house, and it's sleeping, and it's the patient kind, and I don't want it woken until I've had a good long look at it in my own kitchen where I keep my good knives. Grandmama pushed herself up off the stool, her joints reporting like a distant war. I can do something about it. I can do something about anything, girl, given the ingredients and a free afternoon. But not from here and not tonight. First we go and take the child. Everything else waits behind that. Morticia moved to the head of the great table then, and the family turned to her the way a compass turns, because Gomez was the heart of the house and its riot, but Morticia was its spine. Then it is decided, she said, and she did not raise her voice, and she did not need to. At first light we go to Surrey, all of us. We go together, and we go openly, and we bring our Harry home. The people who kept him will want to know who we are and by what right we take him. We will explain it to them very carefully, and we will explain it only once, and I promise you they will understand us perfectly by the time we are done. Fester raised a tentative finger. The screaming, he said, just so I plan my morning. Would you say a lot of screaming or a moderate? Fester. Right, sorry, reading the room. He put his hat back on, then took it off again in case there was more solemnity coming. Wednesday did not sleep in the hour that remained before dawn. Sleep was for people without work to do. She went instead to her own room and stood in the middle of it and considered what one brought to a boy who owned a spider in a jar and a pair of broken glasses and nothing else on the earth. Most children, she supposed, would bring something soft, a bear, a blanket the color of a nursery. The idea made her want to lie down in the family plot and stay there. Softness was what the cupboard people counted on. Softness was the lie they told themselves from their soft beds while a child went hard and hungry beneath their stares. She would not insult him with softness. She would bring him something true. She went to her shelf where she kept the things she valued, arranged by lethality, and then within each grade of lethality by sentiment. She passed over the scorpion set in resin, which was a friend but not a gift. She passed over her own small guillotine, which was hers and would stay hers, though she resolved to build him one of his own by Michaelmas. She took down at last a black iron key that fit no lock in the house, that fit no lock anywhere she had ever tried it, and that was therefore the key to somewhere that did not yet exist, which made it the most valuable object she owned. She had carried it 2 years, waiting to learn what it was for. Now she knew it was for Harry. It was the key to a door with a latch on the inside, a door he could shut against the world whenever he chose, a door no one would ever open from the outside again. It was a promise cast in iron. He would not understand it at first. That was acceptable. She would explain it once plainly, and then she would spend as many years as it took making the promise true, because that was what the key meant, and Wednesday Addams did not give a thing without meaning every ounce of the iron in it. She wrapped it in a square of black silk cut from an old mourning veil, and she put it in the pocket of her dress over the place where ordinary people kept their hearts, and she went down to the car. Thing was waiting for her on the newel post. It signed to her with quick expressive fingers, a question tender in the way only a hand can be tender, having no face to hide behind. Yes, Wednesday told it. I'm ready. Are you riding on the roof? Thing gave her a thumbs up, which was as close to joy as a hand could get, and scuttled ahead of her out the great door into the gray. Dawn in the country of the Addamses came grudgingly and gray, and full of the smell of the standing water and the wet dead garden, which the family breathed in like the finest perfume of Paris. The great black car was brought round from the carriage house by Lurch, who did not so much drive it as loom over it and let it be driven. It was an old car and long, and it had the general silhouette of a hearse that had gotten above itself, and the family filled it the way a hand fills a familiar glove. There had been, as promised, an argument about sabers. Gomez held that a rescue of this magnitude called for 1 saber per adult and a spare, a position of obvious good sense. Fester held that sabers were a summer weapon and that the occasion truly wanted his harpoon, on the grounds that it made a finer sound going in. Grandmama held that they were all of them fools and that a rescue wanted no weapons at all but a great many teeth, and she bared her own to illustrate, which settled the question for everyone standing near her. In the end, Gomez brought 3 sabers and concealed a 4th in the umbrella stand of the car for morale. Fester was permitted his harpoon on the strict understanding that it stayed in the boot, and Grandmama brought her picnic basket, which clanked, and which no one was brave enough to open. Provisions, she said when Morticia's eyebrow rose the necessary 1/4 inch. The child's been starved. You don't mend a starved thing all at once, you'll founder it, but you don't arrive empty-handed either. I made broth, and a few other things in case the cruel family wants persuading. The broth's for him, the other things are for them. She patted the lid, and something inside the basket patted back once and went still. Morticia inclined her head, satisfied. It was, she reflected, a very complete family. Everyone had understood the assignment. Her husband had brought steel and spectacle, her son had brought his practiced frightening face, her daughter had brought something in her pocket over her heart that she had shown to no one and did not need to, Fester had brought enthusiasm and a harpoon, and Grandmama had brought broth and menace in a single basket, which was, when you considered it, the entire creed of the household reduced to luggage. You fed what you loved, you frightened what you hated, and you never ever confused the two. Wednesday was the first out to the car. She stood by the open door in her black dress and her braids, small and upright against the gray morning, and she looked east down the drive toward the low iron gate and the road beyond it, the road that ran, eventually, all the long way to Surrey and to a street where every house was the same, and one of them had a boy in it who apologized in his sleep. Her mother came and stood beside her and did not touch her, because there are moments that are spoiled by touching. You are thinking about him, said Morticia. I am thinking that he does not know we are coming, said Wednesday. No one has ever come for him. He has stopped expecting it. He has folded up expecting it and put it away somewhere he can't reach because it hurt too much to keep it out. She was quiet a moment, watching the road. I know how that is done. I watched Pugsley do it the first winter you and father went to Paris and left us with the governess who did not understand us. I watched my brother stop expecting things. It took 11 days. It will take Harry longer to stop because he has had 6 years of practice, and it will take him longer still to start again. Morticia looked down at her daughter at the top of her dark head at the plumb-line braids. Wednesday did not, as a rule, say this many words at once. She said them now the way a person lays out tools before a great and delicate work. He will start again, Morticia said, because we will be patient and we will be strange and we will be so entirely, so relentlessly glad that he exists that eventually he will run out of ways to argue with us. It is very hard to keep believing you are nothing when a house full of monsters insists every single day that you are theirs. She lifted her chin toward the waiting car, where Gomez was conducting an argument with Fester about the correct storage of a harpoon, and Grandmama was settling her basket, and Thing was riding on the roof with its fingers spread to the wind. "Come, ride up front with Lurch and me. You saw him. It's only right you should be the first face he sees when the door opens." Wednesday looked up at her mother. Whatever moved behind her cold, grave features moved out of sight, where she kept it, where she kept everything. "I want to be the one to open it," she said. "The cupboard, when we get there, I want it to be my hand on the latch." "It will be your hand," said Morticia, "and no one else's." They lingered a moment longer than they needed to before they went, the way a family does at the edge of a thing that will change it, and Gomez took his wife's hand and kissed the length of her arm from the wrist to the elbow, which was how he said a great many things at once, and Morticia let him, which was how she answered. "You realize what we are bringing home," Gomez murmured against her sleeve. "Grandmama's other country, wands and towers and long grudges," she said. "Whoever hid that boy hid him from some. When they come looking, and they will come looking, they will come to our door. Then they will find our door," said Morticia serenely, "and they will find us behind it, and they will discover that we are not what they were counting on. Let them come, mon cher. We have never in the history of this family lost anything we decided to keep. I do not intend to begin with a child." She turned her pale face up to his, and the gray dawn was in it, and something older than the dawn. He apologized in his sleep, Gomez, to no one for being alive. "I heard," said Gomez, and his voice was not theatrical now. "I will hear it for the rest of my life." "Good," said Morticia. "So will I. It will keep us honest. Now put me in the car, my darling, and let us go and commit the finest thing this family has ever done." Gomez put her in the car. And Wednesday Addams got into the long black car and folded her hands in her lap and fixed her river ice eyes on the road that ran to Surrey, and the family that loved terribly and completely, and without a single ordinary bone among them, rolled out through the iron gate into the gray, unsuspecting morning, going to collect their boy. Behind them, the house held its breath and waited to see what they would bring home. Ahead of them, 60 miles off and still asleep, a child in a cupboard turned over on his thin blanket and, out of a habit older than his memory, apologized to the dark for the space he took up in it. He would not have to do that for very much longer. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Collection Day. Privet Drive was worse than Wednesday had described, and she had described it as the most frightening thing she had ever seen. The long black car came off the motorway and into Little Winging a little after 9, and the family looked out through the smoked windows at a landscape that offended them to the marrow. There were no crypts, there were no gargoyles weeping their patient stone tears. There was not one honest gallows in the whole of it. There were only houses, and the houses were all the same, and the sameness went on, and on the way a scream goes on when the person has forgotten there was ever anything but screaming. "Mon Dieu," said Gomez faintly, pressing his face to the glass. "How do they tell which one is theirs?" "They don't," said Morticia. "That is the tragedy of it, cara mia. They come home each evening and let themselves into a stranger's house and never know the difference, because there is no difference, and one warm dinner is as good as another, and one life indistinguishable from the next. It is the loneliest thing in the world dressed up as belonging." A shudder moved through her, elegant and complete. "Look at the lawns, every blade cut to the same height. They have declared war on anything that would dare to grow." Fester had his nose pressed to the other window, and his breath fogged a little circle, and through the circle he watched a man across the road running a machine over his grass for what was plainly not the first time that week. "That one's mowing a lawn that's already mowed," he reported, in the hushed voice of a naturalist who has found something rare. "He's just going over it again. There's nothing there to cut. He's cutting the memory of grass." Fester turned from the window, and his round face was troubled in a way that Fester's face rarely troubled itself to be. "I don't like it here. It's the only place I've ever been that felt haunted by nothing. Give me a good honest ghost. This is worse. This is a place that murdered its own strangeness and buried it under the patio." Pugsley, who had spent the drive constructing a small device out of a mousetrap and a battery, and his own boundless faith that everything improved with electricity, looked up from his lap and out at the identical houses and put the device away, because it seemed suddenly unequal to the horror. "There's no gravestones," he said, appalled. "Anywhere. Where do they put their dead?" "They pretend they don't have any," said Wednesday. "That is the whole engine of a place like this. They have decided that nothing bad has ever happened, and they mow over anything that says otherwise." She had not taken her eyes from the numbers of the houses as they climbed, 2, then 4. And there it was at the end of the car's slow prowl, precisely as the water in Grandmama's bowl had shown it. Number 4 Privet Drive, with its washed car and its hanging basket of plastic flowers, its curtains drawn tidy against the morning, and behind those curtains, folded into a cupboard under the stairs, the reason they had come. "Stop here, Lurch," said Morticia. Lurch stopped the car the way a mountain stops being a slope. He turned his great gray face to the family in the mirror and made the sound that was his whole vocabulary, low and long, and it meant, unmistakably, "Are we ready?" And Morticia answered him. "We are ready," she said. "Bring the car up to the house. Let them see it arrive. Let them watch it fill their tidy little window." She drew on her long black gloves, one finger at a time, without hurry. The people in that house have spent 6 years making themselves invisible to what they did. This morning they are going to be seen. We are all of us going to see them. It is the least we can offer. Inside number 4, Petunia Dursley was frying bacon and admiring, through the kitchen window, the sameness of the street, which she found reassuring in the way other people find prayer reassuring. Vernon sat at the table behind his newspaper, a great walrus of a man going magenta at the edges over something the government had done. Dudley, who at 11 had already achieved the general dimensions of a beanbag chair, was demanding a second breakfast on the grounds that he had finished the first, and Petunia was saying yes, of course, my dudders, as she said yes to Dudley about everything, because saying yes to Dudley was the whole cheerful engine of the house. And under the stairs in the dark, the child who slept there was awake and had been awake for some time, listening to the family move around above him the way you listen to weather. Harry Potter was 6 years old, though he was the size of a child of 4, because a body cannot build itself out of the scraps left over from other people's plenty. He had a thin face and a great deal of black hair that stood up no matter what was done to it, and green eyes behind a pair of glasses that had been broken so many times the tape at the bridge had tape of its own. He lay very still on the thin mattress that was his, listening. He had a system. You listened for the shape of the morning. You learned from the footsteps whether it was going to be a shouting day or a quiet day or a day when they forgot you entirely, which was the best kind of day, and you arranged yourself accordingly. Today the footsteps were ordinary, bacon's smell, Dudley's wine, Aunt Petunia's yes of course. An ordinary morning which meant chores after breakfast and a slice of bread if he was quick and quiet, and it meant staying small, which he was excellent at, having practiced it his whole life. He held his jam jar up to the thin line of light that came under the cupboard door. The spider had built a new web in the night, corner to corner across the glass, a perfect thing, and sat in the middle of it very patient. Harry watched it. He did not have a name for it because naming things was dangerous. Naming a thing meant you had decided to keep it, and Harry had learned young that anything he decided to keep would be taken, so he kept the spider without keeping it, loved it without the word, in the safe way, the only way he had. Boy, Aunt Petunia rapped on the cupboard door sharp twice. The spider fled to its corner. Up now, there's bacon wants turning, and I won't have you lying about in there like the dead. Her voice had the particular thinness it always had when she spoke to the cupboard, the thinness of someone talking to a stain they could not get out of the carpet. And there's to be no funny business today. Your uncle's got the Masons coming Thursday, and this house is going to be perfect, do you hear, perfect, so you'll keep yourself out of sight and out of trouble. Yes, Aunt Petunia, said Harry, because that was the correct answer, and there was only ever one correct answer. He put the jam jar carefully in the corner where the spider would be safe, and he pushed open the cupboard door, and he unfolded himself out into the hall, small and quiet, blinking in the brightness, the smallest and least wanted thing in a house that measured everything by whether it could be shown to the neighbors. That was the exact moment the doorbell rang. It did not ring the way the Dursleys' doorbell usually rang, which was a cheerful 2-note ding-dong they had chosen from a catalogue because it was the same one the Palkises had. It rang low and long, and it went on a little after it should have stopped, a single sustained note that got into the fillings of your teeth and the roots of your hair, and Vernon Dursley lowered his newspaper and frowned at the hall. Who the devil is that at this hour? He said. It was not a question so much as an accusation leveled at the general concept of visitors. Petunia was already at the net curtains of the front room, twitching them the necessary half-inch, and Harry saw her go still. He knew all his aunt's stillnesses. There was the stillness of listening at his door, and the stillness of counting the good china, and the stillness of watching the street for anything that might reflect badly on them. This was a new one. This was the stillness of a woman looking at something her mind refused to file. There's a— Petunia's voice did something. Vernon, there's a car. Well, of course there's a car, Petunia. It's a road, cars. It's a black car. It's very long and it's very black and it's parked across our drive and there are people getting out of it. She twitched the curtain another half-inch and made a small sound. Vernon, there are so many of them. Vernon heaved himself up and went to the window with the tread of a man who intended to sort this out, and looked and stopped intending things. Coming up the front path of number 4, Privet Drive, in the flat gray light of a Surrey morning, was a procession the like of which the street had never held and would talk about, in lowered voices, for years. In front came a woman so tall and so pale, and so entirely dressed in black that she seemed less to walk than to be conveyed, gliding up the path with her hands folded before her and her dark hair falling straight to her waist, and there was something in her face, some serene and bottomless calm, that made Vernon's bluster die in his throat before he had even opened the door. Beside her strode a smaller man in a pinstripe suit, with a mustache like a startled crow and eyes that were having the time of their life. Behind them came a bald and enormous person wrapped in fur who was carrying, for no reason Vernon could construct, a lit torch in broad daylight. A tiny ancient woman with a face like a walnut and a picnic basket that appeared to be moving on its own. 2 children, a boy built like a cannonball and a girl in a black dress with 2 braids and the eyes of a hanging judge. Something small scuttled along the top of the garden wall, keeping pace with the family, and Vernon's eyes slid off it because his mind declined to accept that it was a hand. And at the very back, unfolding itself up out of the driver's seat and up past any reasonable stopping point, a butler the approximate size and disposition of a wardrobe, who looked at the house and groaned. Wednesday reached the door first. She did not use the bell again. She simply stood on the step and looked up at the frosted glass and waited, and something about the waiting was worse than any amount of knocking. Vernon Dursley opened his own front door because he could not think what else to do, and drew himself up to his full considerable width in the doorway, and said, in the voice he used on tradesmen and his nephew, "Yes, what is it? We don't want any." Morticia Addams looked at him. It was a long look, unhurried and complete, the look of a woman appraising a coffin she has decided not to buy. "Mr. Dursley," she said. Her voice was low and cool, and it filled the whole doorway. "How good of you to be home. We have come for the child." Later, Vernon would tell people that he had stood his ground, that he had defended his home, that no one pushed Vernon Dursley around on his own front step. This was not what happened. What happened was that Vernon opened his mouth to bellow, and the small, mad-eyed man in the pinstripe suit stepped smartly forward and seized his hand and shook it with tremendous warmth. "Gomez Addams," he announced, pumping Vernon's arm as though drawing water. "Charmed, delighted, appalled. What a house you have. What a truly monstrous house. Not one interesting shadow in it, I'd wager. Not one door that opens onto somewhere it shouldn't. My condolences." He released Vernon's hand and swept past him into the hall before Vernon's outrage could finish loading. "Ah, wallpaper, in a color. Kara, come and look. They've chosen a color for the wall and then repeated it. The commitment, the horror." "Now see here," Vernon began. "We see here perfectly," said Morticia, and she came in past him too, gliding, and the temperature of the hall seemed to follow her like a train. "We have been seeing here since we arrived. That is rather the difficulty." What followed from the Dursleys' point of view was an invasion conducted with impeccable manners. The family flowed into number 4 the way water flows into a sinking boat, unhurried and total. Fester came in with his torch and looked around the sitting room with frank pity. Grandmamma set her basket down on the good carpet, and it settled with a clank and a low animal grumble, and Petunia stared at it and could not stop staring at it. Lurch had to turn sideways to fit through the door and then simply stood in the hall, a wall that had learned to loom, blocking most of the light. The cannonball-shaped boy went straight to Dudley, who was cowering behind the sofa around a mouthful of the first breakfast, and studied him with professional interest. "You're enormous," said Pugsley, not unkindly. "What do they feed you?" "Everything," whispered Dudley. "Lucky," said Pugsley, and meant it, and then his eye fell on the second door off the hall, the little one under the stairs with the latch on the outside, and his whole cheerful face changed and closed like a fist. He looked at his sister, but Wednesday was already there. She had known where it would be before she crossed the threshold. She had seen it in the vision, the dishwater carpet and the staircase and the wrong little door beneath it, and she had carried the shape of it 60 miles in the dark of her own chest, and now here it was, real, worse for being real, a cupboard door with a latch on the outside and a clean warm house full of the smell of somebody else's bacon. The latch was drawn back. The door stood ajar because Harry had been called out to turn the bacon a lifetime ago, 3 minutes ago, before the doorbell rang. Wednesday put her small pale hand flat against the door and pushed it wide. She had promised her mother it would be her hand on the latch, and she had meant to open it herself, meant to be the one to draw back the bolt and let the light in. That the door was already open, that no bolt remained to draw, undid something in her that a locked door would have left intact. He had been let out to work, that was all, not freed. Let out the way you let a tool out of a drawer to be used and put back. She stood looking into the small dark space, at the thin mattress and the single folded blanket and the jam jar in the corner with a spider in it, and she was quiet for a moment in a way that the whole loud house did not disturb. Then she turned and she found him. He was standing at the foot of the stairs, pressed back against the banister, a thin, undersized boy in clothes cut for a child 3 sizes larger, with a great deal of black hair and taped glasses and eyes the exact green of the bottle glass in Grandmamma's cabinet, and he was watching the invasion of his aunt's house with an expression Wednesday recognized, because she had seen it in the vision and she had seen it once on her brother's face in the winter of the governess. It was not fear. Fear expected something. This was the flat, braced blankness of a child who had stopped expecting and was simply waiting to find out how the new thing would hurt him, so that he could get on with surviving it. Wednesday crossed the hall to him. She moved without hurry, the way you move toward a wild thing you do not wish to startle, and she stopped a careful arm's length away, which was as close as she judged he could bear, and she looked at him, and he looked back at her, 2 odd small children in the middle of a great deal of noise. "You're Harry," she said. It was not a question either. Harry's mouth opened. No sound came out of it for a moment. Then in a voice worn thin from disuse, the voice of a child who had learned that speaking got you noticed. "How do you know my name?" "I saw you," said Wednesday. "A long way from here, 4 nights ago. You were in there." She did not point at the cupboard. She did not need to. "You had a spider in a jar and you were keeping it because it had never been cruel to you. You said sorry in your sleep to no one. I have come a very long way to tell you that you never have to say it again." Harry stared at her. Whatever he had been braced for, it had not been this. He had a whole armory of answers for shouting and for blame and for being called a liar and a freak and an ungrateful little wretch. He had no answer at all for a pale, grave girl his own size telling him, flatly, without pity, that she had seen him in the dark and come to take him out of it. "Nobody comes," he said at last. It was not an argument. It was the deepest and truest thing he knew, offered up the way you offer up the rule of a game to someone who plainly does not understand how it is played. "That's not nobody comes for me. I'm not, you've got the wrong, there isn't anyone who—" "I came," said Wednesday. She reached into the pocket of her dress, over the place where ordinary people kept their hearts, and drew out the square of black silk and unwrapped it, and held out on her flat palm the black iron key that fit no lock in her house or anywhere. "This is for you," she said. "It's a key. It doesn't open anything yet. It's the key to a door with the latch on the inside, so you can shut the world out whenever you want to, and no one can ever open it from the other side. There isn't a door for it yet. We're going to build you one, that's a promise, and I don't make them, so it's worth something." She pressed the cold iron into his hand and closed his thin fingers around it with her own once briefly and let go. "Keep it in your pocket, over the heart, that's where it goes." Harry looked down at the key in his palm. It was heavy and black and old, and it was, he understood with a slow dawning that hurt more than any blow ever had, a gift, not a bribe, not a trap. Not something that would be counted and held against him later. A gift given by a girl who did not smile, who had come 60 miles to give it, who had seen him in the dark of his cupboard, and had decided on the strength of that alone that he was worth the coming. His hand closed around the key. He did not cry because he had taught himself out of crying years ago in the cupboard in the dark. But something moved through him that was older than the not crying, and he stood at the foot of the stairs in his two big clothes and held the iron promise in his fist and did not let it go. The rest of the family, meanwhile, had undertaken to make the acquaintance of number 4, Privet Drive, and number 4 was not enjoying it. Fester had discovered the Dursleys' collection of framed photographs, every one of them a portrait of Dudley at some stage of his expansion, and not one of them containing the child who lived under the stairs, and he studied the wall for a long moment with his torch held up to it. "There's a child missing from this house," he observed to no one, and they photographed around him. "Look, 6 years of birthdays and he's not in a single one. That takes work, you'd have to try." He said it without heat, which was worse than heat, and he set the torch down on the mantelpiece where it began, very gently, to scorch a ring into the varnish that Petunia would find later and never be able to explain. Thing had gotten into the kitchen. Thing had strong feelings about a house that fed one child everything and another child nothing, and it expressed those feelings by opening every cupboard door in the kitchen at once, so that Petunia turned from the window to find her spotless kitchen yawning open on all sides, and something moving among the tins, and she made a noise like a kettle and could not make any other. "It's rude to stare," Grandmama told her, settling herself uninvited into the best kitchen chair and setting her basket on the table. The basket grumbled. Petunia's eyes went to it and stuck. "You'll be wondering what's in the basket. Everybody does here." The old woman lifted the lid a careful inch, and a smell came out of it, green and low and complicated, and she ladled something dark into a cup and pushed it across the table. "Restorative. You look like you could use it. Bit of comfrey, bit of graveyard, bit of this and that, puts the color back in a person." She smiled, and it was a terrible smile, full of long yellow teeth and genuine hospitality, and that was the worst part, that she meant it kindly. "Go on, we don't poison guests. Guests are sacred. It's family we poison, and only the ones that have earned it." Petunia did not drink the restorative. Petunia backed into the corner between the refrigerator and the wall and stayed there, and Grandmama shrugged and drank it herself with evident satisfaction, and that was somehow the most frightening thing of all. Out in the sitting room, Dudley had made a break for the stairs and had run directly into Pugsley, who had been waiting for exactly this and had in fact been practicing his face the whole way from the mansion. Pugsley showed Dudley the face. Dudley sat down heavily on the third step and discovered a number of new things about himself, chiefly that he could, under the correct circumstances, be quiet. "You eat everything," Pugsley told him conversationally, sitting down beside him on the step, "and he ate nothing, and you never once said anything, and you're going to be like this your whole life, big and scared and mean, and I'm going to grow up somewhere wonderful with a brother I found in a cupboard, and you're going to grow up here." He patted Dudley's enormous knee, not unkindly. "That's the whole punishment. My mother thought it up. She's very good." While the family made itself known throughout the house, the reckoning had begun in the sitting room, and it was very quiet, which was how the Addamses did the things that mattered. Morticia had seated herself on the edge of the Dursleys' floral sofa without being invited, arranging her black skirts about her, and she looked up at Vernon and Petunia, who had been herded back together by the general drift of events and now stood clutching each other by the mantelpiece beneath a photograph of Dudley at Majorca, and she began to speak to them in a voice you had to lean in to hear, which meant that they leaned in, which was the point. "I'm going to tell you what I know," she said, "and then I'm going to tell you what is going to happen, and I'm going to do both only once, so I recommend that you attend. Vernon found some of his voice. You can't just come into a man's house. You put a child in a cupboard. Morticia did not raise her voice. She lowered it, and it was worse. You put a living child, an infant when he came to you, in the space under your stairs where you keep the Hoover and the fuse box and the boxes of things you have stopped loving. You fed him on what your son left. You clothed him in what your son outgrew. You let him believe every day for 6 years, by 1,000 small economies of cruelty, that he was less than the dog you don't have and the guests you do. And you did all of it, Mr. Dursley, in a clean house on a clean street with your name on the door, and you told yourselves you were decent people because you never once raised your hand. Her pale eyes moved from Vernon to Petunia and rested there. You didn't need to raise your hand. You had a cupboard. That was crueler and quieter, and it would never leave a mark a neighbor could see. I know exactly what you are. I have met a great many wicked people in my life, and I have liked most of them. You are a new kind to me. You are wicked without even the courage to enjoy it. Petunia had gone the color of the net curtains. He came to us, she said, and her voice cracked down the middle. We never asked for him. He was left on the step like a bottle of milk, my sister's boy, my freak of a sister, and her. She got no further, because Grandmamma had appeared in the doorway with her cup, and the little ancient woman fixed Petunia with her bright black eyes, and the temperature of the room went down several degrees all at once. Say the next word, Grandmamma invited pleasantly, and find out what else I keep in the basket. Petunia did not say the next word. Here is what will happen, Morticia went on, as though there had been no interruption, because to her there had not been. You are going to give us the child. You are going to sign a paper that my husband has had drawn up, which places him permanently and entirely in our care and severs your claim to him forever, and you are going to sign it gladly, because I promise you that from the moment we drove into your street, you have wanted nothing on this earth so much as to be rid of us, and there is exactly one way to be rid of us, and it is to let us take what we came for and go. She rose from the sofa, unfolding to her full considerable height, and Vernon and Petunia pressed back against the mantel. And then you are going to live your lives. You are going to mow your lawn and count your china and go on to your dinner parties, and you are going to be in every visible particular precisely as you have always been. That is your whole punishment, Mr. and Mrs. Dursley, and it is a terrible one, though you are far too small to feel the size of it. You are going to go on being exactly what you are in exactly this house forever. We would not dream of changing you. We are only going to take the one good thing that was ever left on your step, and we are going to raise it to be happy, which is the one outcome you would have died before allowing, and every year on this day, for the rest of your lives, some part of you is going to remember that you had it, and gave it away for a quiet street, and count yourselves lucky, and be right. Gomez at the window produced the papers from inside his pinstripe jacket with a conjurer's flourish, and a fountain pen the color of dried blood, and laid them on the coffee table beside the Radio Times. Vernon looked at the papers. He looked at the enormous butler filling the hall, and the bald man whose torch was quietly ruining the mantelpiece, and the basket that grumbled, and the tiny terrible grandmother with her cup, and the impossible black-eyed woman who knew about the cupboard, who knew all of it, who had said it out loud in his own sitting-room in front of his own Dudley. And some animal part of Vernon Dursley, the part underneath the bluster and the walrus mustache and the 6 years of quiet cruelty, understood that he had been beaten not by force, which he could have complained about, but being seen, which he could not. He signed. His hand shook. Petunia signed under him, fast, not reading, the way you sign anything to make a nightmare leave your house. There, said Morticia softly, gathering the papers. Was that so hard? You've wanted to do that for 6 years. Doesn't it feel like putting down something heavy? She turned from them without waiting for an answer, because she had never in her life been less interested in anything than she was in the Dursleys now that the child was theirs. Gomez, mother, we're leaving. Fester, put out whatever you're burning. Lurch the car. They gathered Harry up gently, and it took some doing, because Harry had a lifetime of experience in not being gathered up. Morticia knelt down in front of him in her black gown in the middle of the invaded hall, so that her pale face was level with his, and she looked at him with those bottomless dark eyes, and she said, "Do you know who we are, Harry?" Harry shook his head. His fist was still closed around the iron key. "We are the Addamses," she said. "We are strange, and we are difficult, and a great many people find us frightening, and they are correct too. But there is one thing you must understand about us before you get in that car, and it is the only thing you truly need to know today, and it is this." She took his free hand in both of her cool ones, carefully, the way you take up something you have decided is precious. You will never sleep in a cupboard again. You will never again eat what someone else has finished with. You will never again say sorry to the dark for taking up space, because in our house the taking up of space is the whole point of you, and we intend to give you a great deal of it. You are ours now. We came a long way to say so. And an Addams does not give back what is theirs, not ever, not to anyone. Do you believe me? Harry looked at her. He looked past her at Wednesday, who had seen him in a dream, and at the mad delighted man and the cannonball boy sitting on the stairs beside a subdued Dudley. and the grandmother with the terrible basket, and the giant and the hand. He had not properly registered the hand yet, and would have questions later, and the whole impossible black-clad family of them standing in Aunt Petunia's clean bright hall like a piece of the good dark that had come loose and drifted in to find him. "No," he said honestly. "I don't. Nobody keeps me." Morticia's face did the thing that was not a smile because a smile would have been too easy. "That's all right," she said, rising and putting out her hand for him to take or not take as he chose. "You don't have to believe it today. We're very patient. We'll prove it to you every single day for the rest of your life, and one morning years from now you'll wake up and find you believed it while you were sleeping and forgot to notice. Come along. Wednesday will sit with you." "She hardly ever bites." "I don't bite you," said Wednesday, appearing at his elbow. "You saw the vision. You're mine. I don't bite what's mine." She considered. "Pugsley is fair game." "That's fair," agreed Pugsley cheerfully from the stairs. And Harry Potter, 6 years old and the size of a child of 4, holding a black iron key in one fist, and after a moment, a pale girl's hand in the other, walked out of number 4 Privet Drive and did not look back at the cupboard, because there was nothing in it he wanted except the spider. And Fester, who had lingered, scooped the jam jar tenderly off the cupboard floor on his way out and carried it to the car, cupped in both hands like a saint bearing a relic, murmuring to it the whole way. They put Harry in the middle of the long back seat, between Wednesday and the window, and Grandmama pressed a cup of broth into his hands that was warm and smelled of things he could not name and tasted, when he risked it, of being fed by someone who wanted him fed. The car pulled away from the curb. Privet Drive slid backward past the smoked glass, house after identical house, lawn after murdered lawn, and shrank and was gone. Harry drank his broth in careful sips, braced the whole time for someone to take it away and tell him it had been a test. No one took it away. The bald man in the front seat kept twisting round to beam at him, and then facing forward again when Morticia murmured something, and the enormous driver drove, and the grandmother watched him drink with the fierce attention of a woman keeping score against 6 years of empty plates. When the broth was gone, Harry held the warm, empty cup in both hands and did not know what to do with his eyes. Something moved on the seat between him and Wednesday. Harry looked down. It was the hand. It had climbed down off the roof at some point, and it sat now on the leather upholstery, patient, and it lifted 2 fingers and gave him a small, courteous wave. Harry did not scream. He had used up all his screaming years ago and had never gotten any more. He looked at the hand for a long moment, and the hand looked back insofar as a hand can, and then Harry did the thing that decided several of the Addamses, privately and permanently, that he was going to be all right. He set down his empty cup, and he lifted his own small hand, and he shook it. "That's thing," said Wednesday, watching. "It likes you. It doesn't shake with just anyone. It bit the last governess." "Why does it? How is it?" Harry started, and then stopped, because he had learned that questions were a kind of taking up space, and he braced for the snap that always came when he took up space. It did not come. Instead, the pale girl beside him turned her river-ice eyes on him and said, with the flat patience of someone laying down the first true rule of a new world, "You're allowed to ask things now. That's one of the things that's different. In our house, asking is how we say we're interested, and being interested in each other is the whole point of a family. So, ask." She folded her hands in her lap. "It's a hand. It's called thing. It's been with us always. Nobody knows the rest of it, and nobody's rude enough to ask thing about it. That's the answer. What's your next question?" Harry looked at her and at the hand, and at the strange, grave family in the strange long car carrying him away from the only house he had ever known toward a place he could not begin to imagine. And he discovered, cautiously, the way you test a floorboard you have been told will hold you, that he had a great many next questions, more than he had ever been allowed in his life. A whole cupboard of them he had folded up small and put away, and that for the first time there was someone who wanted to hear them. "Where are we going?" he asked. It was the biggest one. It was the only one that mattered. "Home," said Wednesday. "You'll hate it. It's cold and it's dark and there are things in the walls and a monster in the cellar and a graveyard where the garden should be." She watched his face while she said it, gauging how she gauged everything. "Pugsley and I will teach you to fence and to fall off things and to poison your enemies, and Grandmama will feed you until you have to be rolled through doorways, and Father will weep with joy roughly 4 times a day, which you'll get used to. No one will ever put you in a cupboard or forget your birthday or photograph around you. You'll have your own room with a door that locks from the inside. Once we build the door your key goes to." She paused and looked out at the motorway unspooling gray and endless toward the north. "You'll be an Addams. It's the worst thing that can happen to a person and the best. You'll see." Harry held his iron key in one fist and his empty broth cup in the other, and he looked out at the road with her, and he did not say anything, because there was nothing left to say that the day had not already said. Behind them, 60 miles back and shrinking, the Dursleys stood in the doorway of number 4 and watched the long black car go and did not wave, and went at last back inside to their bacon gone cold in the pan and their perfect quiet street, and the small dark cupboard under the stairs that would stay empty now forever, its latch drawn back, its door standing open on nothing. A little hollow monument in the heart of their tidy house to the one good thing they had been given, and had signed away for the sake of the neighbors not talking. Ahead, past Lurch's great shoulders and the long black hood, the road ran on toward a house that had been holding its breath since dawn, waiting to meet the child it had already decided to love. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, House of Thorns. The house came up out of the trees the way a truth comes up out of a long silence, all at once and taller than you were ready for. Harry had spent the last hour of the drive watching the country change through the smoked glass. The tidy fields had given way to older land, rougher and wetter, hedgerows gone wild, then woods that closed over the road so the afternoon light came down green and broken, and then the woods pulled back and there it was on its hill, and Harry forgot to keep himself small enough not to be noticed and pressed his face to the window to look. It was a great black pile of a house, gabled and turreted and leaning in places it should not have lain, with a tower at one end that had given up being vertical some centuries ago, and a weather vane on top shaped like a bat that turned slowly against the low gray sky though there was no wind. Ivy had eaten most of the eastern wall and appeared to be dead, which somehow made it worse and better at once. The windows were tall and dark, and there were a great many of them, and one of them, high up under the roof, had a light in it the color of a struck match, and the light moved from one window to the next as the car came up the drive, keeping pace, as if the house had woken a room to watch them arrive. Beyond the house the land fell away in tiers of drowned garden to a low stone wall, and past the wall stood the crooked ranks of the family cemetery, marble and granite gone soft and gray with weather, leaning together like people sharing a secret. A single crow sat on the tallest stone and did not move as they passed. "That's ours," said Wednesday beside him. She had been watching his face rather than the house. "All of it, the graveyard's the best part. Grandmama's people are in it and some of Father's and a few we don't have paperwork for. It's very quiet, you can think in it." She paused. "You'll have thinking to do, everyone does at first." The car came to a stop before a flight of worn stone steps, and the great front door at the top of them opened before anyone had touched it, and Lurch came down the steps to the car, one at a time, a descent with the grandeur of a landslide, and opened Harry's door and looked down at him from the enormous gray height of himself. Harry looked up. It was a very long way up. Lurch regarded the small boy in the too big clothes for a moment. Then he bent slowly the way a crane bends and held out one hand the size of a dinner plate, palm up, an offer and not a command, and made his sound low and gentle, which in this instance meant welcome. Harry looked at the enormous open hand. He had learned to read hands how he had learned to read footsteps, and there were hands that grabbed and hands that struck and hands that pointed at the cupboard, and he had never once in his life seen a hand held out flat and low like this, waiting to be met rather than to take. He put his own small hand into it. Lurch's fingers closed around it with the exact and careful pressure of a person holding something he has been told is breakable and believes it, and he helped Harry down out of the car and set him on his feet on the gravel as though setting down a soap bubble, and straightened and groaned, and the groan meant more or less there. "Thank you," Harry said, because it seemed important, and because no one had told him not to. Lurch made a different sound, softer, and it meant, more or less, that a boy who said thank you to the butler on his first day was a boy the house had been right to send for. They brought him in through the great door, and the household was waiting for him in the hall, arranged not in a line, which would have been frightening, but scattered about the enormous room in a loose, casual way, each of them pretending to be doing something else so that Harry would not feel looked at, which was the most careful kindness anyone had ever done him, and which he did not recognize as kindness because he had no experience of it. The hall was the size of a church and darker. A fire the color of embers burned in a hearth big enough to stand in. Suits of armor stood in the corners, and one of them was, Harry would learn, occupied and would wave. From the high ceiling hung a chandelier of black iron and dripping candles, and cobwebs hung from the chandelier, and the cobwebs had been arranged, he understood after a moment, deliberately, the way another family might arrange flowers. Gomez came across the hall with his arms open, weeping already, and stopped himself just short of seizing the child up in an embrace, because Wednesday had told him plainly in the car that Harry was not ready to be seized, and Gomez, for all his exuberance, would sooner have cut off his own mustache than frighten this child. "Welcome home," Gomez said instead, and went down on one knee at a careful distance, level with Harry's eyes, and pressed his hand to his own heart. "Harry Addams. You don't know yet that that's your name, and that's fine. Take all the time you want. It'll be waiting for you when you're ready to pick it up. Everything here will wait for you. That's the one thing this house has always had, more than money, more than sense, time and patience, and a great deal of room. You'll never be hurried into anything again." He wiped his eyes with a black silk handkerchief and beamed. "Now, are you hungry? You must be starved." "You're starved, I can see it. It's an outrage. We're going to fix it. Come and see what Grandmama has done." What Grandmama had done was the kitchen. The kitchen was a long, low cavern of a room, warm from a range that had not gone cold in living memory, hung about with drying herbs and drying other things, and in the middle of it stood a table that could have seated 30, and one end of the table had been laid for Harry. It had been laid the way you lay a table for someone whose stomach you intend to declare war on. There was bread, still steaming, torn open to show the soft inside. There was a pot of soup thick enough to stand a spoon in, and butter in a dish, and cheese, and a roast fowl of a kind Harry did not recognize and would decide not to ask about, and apples and pears in a black bowl, and a jug of milk, and small dark cakes that smelled of cinnamon and something underneath the cinnamon, and it was all of it, every dish, positioned close to the one chair, so that a boy would not have to reach or ask or wait for anyone to decide he had earned it. Harry stood in the doorway and looked at the table and did not move toward it, because in his experience a table like this was a trap. A table like this was for other people, and you were called in to look at it so that you would understand precisely what you were not getting, and then you were sent back to the cupboard with the smell of it in your nose. He had learned that lesson at 3 Christmases and 1 birthday that was not his, and he had learned it thoroughly. "Sit down, boy," said Grandmama from the range, not turning round. "It's yours, all of it. You don't have to earn it and you don't have to finish it, and there's more where it came from. There's always more. This house runs on more." She turned then, wiping her hands on her apron, and her walnut face was fierce and bright. "I cooked it for you, nobody else. Look, I put your name on your chair." And she had chalked Harry in crooked capitals on the seat back of the one laid place, so there could be no mistake, so no one could say later that he had taken someone else's. Harry crossed the kitchen slowly and stood by the chair with his name on it and put one finger on the chalked letters, and then he sat down very carefully on the edge of the seat, ready to be told he had misunderstood. No one told him he had misunderstood. He ate. He started slow and braced, a mouthful of bread, watching them the whole time for the moment it would be taken away. And then the bread was so good and no one took it away, and he had some soup, and the soup was hot, and it went down into a cold place in him that had been cold so long he had stopped feeling it as cold and had only felt it as himself, and he ate faster, and then he ate the way a starved thing eats, without dignity, both hands. And Grandmama watched him with her arms folded and her chin up in something that in another face might have been called triumph, and Gomez had to leave the room, and Morticia stood in the doorway with her hand over her mouth, and Fester cried frankly into his own hat. Only Wednesday sat down across from him and ate too, methodically, an apple, matching his pace so he would not be the only one eating, so he would not feel watched, and she said, around a bite, "Slow down or you'll be sick. Being sick here is fine, we're not squeamish, but it's a waste of good soup. There's more tomorrow, there's more forever. You can stop believing you have to eat it all before someone stops you. No one is going to stop you." She took another bite. "That's the second rule. The first was that you're allowed to ask things. The second is that the food doesn't run out. Learn them in order." Harry slowed down. He looked at her across the enormous table, the one who had seen him in the dark, eating an apple in the warm kitchen of a house on a hill, and he put down the bread he had been holding in his fist, and he said in a very small voice, the first thing he had volunteered since they took him, "Why did you come for me? You didn't even know me." Wednesday considered the question with the seriousness she gave to all things. "I saw you," she said. "That's the whole reason, and it's enough. In my family, seeing someone is not a small thing. Most people go their whole lives without once being seen, not really, and they die of it slowly, the way your aunt and uncle are dying of it in a clean house on a quiet street." She set down her apple core. "I saw you and you were real to me, more real than most living people, and you were in the dark, and I don't leave things I've seen in the dark, so I came. And now you're here and you're mine, which means you're all of ours, and that's permanent. There's no version of this where you go back. I want you to understand that part clearly, because you keep waiting to go back. I can see you doing it, and you can stop. There's nothing to go back to. This is the back now. This is as far back as it goes." Harry looked at her for a long moment, then he picked the bread up again and ate it slowly, and it stayed his, and the kitchen was warm, and nobody stopped him. After, they showed him his room. He had not let himself expect anything, but the animal part of him that had lived in a cupboard had expected a cupboard. A nicer cupboard, perhaps, this being a strange, rich house, but a cupboard, a mean little space at the bottom of the household, a place to be kept out of the way. He followed Morticia and Wednesday up the great staircase and along a gallery hung with portraits whose eyes followed him without menace, up another stair, along a corridor where the floorboards told him things, to a door of dark wood with an iron ring for a handle, and Morticia opened it and stood back and let him look. It was not a cupboard. It was a room, and it was a large room, larger than the Dursleys' sitting room, with a window, a real window, tall and arched, with a deep stone sill you could sit in, that looked out over the drowned garden and the cemetery and the woods beyond, all the way to the low gray line of the hills. There was a bed in it with 4 black posts and heavy dark hangings that could be drawn all the way round to make a safe little cave, or left open, as he liked. There was a fireplace with a fire already lit. There was a wardrobe and a desk and a chair and a shelf, and the shelf was empty, and Harry looked at the empty shelf and did not understand it until Wednesday told him. "That's for your things," she said. "You'll get things. Everyone thinks they don't have things until they have somewhere to put them, and then it turns out they've been collecting things their whole life in their head, waiting for a shelf. You'll fill it. Give it a year." She crossed to the window and put her hand on the deep sill. "This is the good." The window seat, I have one too. It's for when you can't sleep, which will be often at first. You sit in the window and you watch the graveyard and you think, and eventually you can sleep. The house is quietest here. I chose this room for you myself. It's next to mine. That wall, she rapped the wall by the head of the bed twice, and after a moment 2 soft raps came back through it from the other side from her room in answer. That wall's shared. If you knock, I'll knock back, any hour. That's not a rule, that's just true. Harry stood in the middle of the large room that was his and turned around once slowly, taking it in, and his hand went to his pocket where the iron key was, and he took it out and looked at it and then looked at the door, at the iron ring, at the plain business of the latch. There's no lock, he said. It was not a complaint. It was the old fear speaking. The one that knew a room without a lock was a room anyone could come into in the night. Yet, said Morticia from the doorway. She had been very quiet, letting the children have the room, but she came in now, gliding and knelt by the door and touched the place where a lock would go. Lurch is going to fit one tomorrow, a good one. Iron old, the kind that only opens from the inside, the kind your key already fits, because Wednesday chose your key 2 years ago and has been waiting for you to arrive so it would have a door. You will be the only person in this house who can lock or unlock this room. Not I, not your father, not even Wednesday, you and no one else forever, she rose. A person who has been kept in a place he could not leave should have, first of all and before anything else, one door in the world that no one can open but him. It is where we begin, everything else grows from it. Harry closed his fist around the key. He looked at the door that would be his to lock, and the window that was his to sit in, and the shelf that was his to fill, and the wall that knocked back, and something in his chest that had been holding a hard shape for 6 years shifted very slightly, the way a stone shifts in a wall before the wall decides whether to stand or fall. In the afternoon of that first day, Pugsley took charge of him. This was a formal thing in its way. Pugsley had spent the morning clearing the mannequins out of the second-best dungeon and had put up over the low arched door of it a sign in his own careful capitals that read Harry S., and he came and found the newcomer in the gallery where Harry had been standing very still in front of a portrait that was standing very still in front of him, the two of them at a respectful impasse. That's Great Uncle Blot, Pugsley said. He'll stare at you for a week and then get bored. Don't take it personally. Come on, I've got something to show you, and you're allowed to say no. Everyone keeps telling me to tell you you're allowed to say no, so there, you're allowed to say no. But you should say yes, it's a dungeon and it's yours. Harry did not say no. The second best dungeon was down a curl of stone stair, cool and echoing and lit by a row of candles that Pugsley had installed at boy height, and it had a workbench along one wall and a great many shelves and a drain in the middle of the floor that Harry decided not to ask about. On the workbench sat a device made of a bicycle wheel, 3 mousetraps, a car battery, and a doll's head, and Pugsley regarded it with the modest pride of an inventor. It doesn't do anything yet, he admitted. That's the fun part, you build it and you don't know what it'll do and then you find out, usually all at once, usually loudly. I've lost both eyebrows twice, they grow back, Grandmama has a cream. He looked at Harry sidelong, gauging the way his sister gauged things because they were more alike than either of them liked to admit. Wednesday says you've never been allowed to break anything. Harry shook his head. Not ever. Pugsley was appalled. It was the purest appalled Harry had ever seen, uncomplicated, a boy genuinely grieved on his behalf. Not even a plate, not even by accident, so you got to hear the noise. I broke a cup once, Harry said, at the Dursleys. He did not finish the sentence. The end of the sentence was in it anyway. Pugsley considered him for a moment. Then he went to a shelf and took down a stack of old chipped saucers, the kind the house had in a surplus that verged on the supernatural, and he set them on the workbench and he pushed them toward Harry. Break these, he said. Harry looked at the saucers. He looked at Pugsley. Because you're allowed to, because nobody's going to shout, because it makes a really good noise and you've never got to hear it, and that's not right, and I'm fixing it. Pugsley picked up the top saucer and held it out. Go on. Throw it at the wall as hard as you want. Harder, I'll show you. And he took a saucer of his own and flung it against the far stone wall with tremendous relish, and it shattered into 100 singing pieces, and the sound went up and rang around the dungeon and came back, and Pugsley grinned at the noise the way other children grin at Christmas. Harry held his saucer. His arm did not want to. 6 years had trained his arm to keep things whole, to be careful, to not make sounds, to not take up the space that a shattering plate took up in the air of a house. He held the saucer and his arm shook. You don't have to, Pugsley said, quieter now, watching. It's allowed, but it's not a rule. Nothing here's a rule except be who you are and let everyone else do the same. And Harry threw the saucer. It was a poor throw, weak and offline, and it hit the wall a glancing blow and broke into only 3 or 4 pieces, but it broke, and it made the sound, and nobody shouted, and nobody came, and the pieces lay on the floor being broken, and it was fine. It was allowed. It was even apparently admired because Pugsley whooped and handed him another one. And Harry threw that one harder. And the one after that harder still, both hands, a sound coming out of him now that was not crying and not quite laughing but somewhere new between the two, and the saucers shattered against the old stone one after another. years of held breath going out of him in singing pieces, until the floor of the second-best dungeon was carpeted in broken china and two boys stood among the wreckage grinning at each other, and Pugsley said with deep satisfaction, "There. Now you've broken something. Now you're really one of us," and then, because he was 11 and could not help it, "Bet I can break more than you." "Bet you can't," said Harry, and reached for the next saucer and discovered somewhere in the reaching that he was happy, though he did not have the word ready and would not find it for a while, and did not need it because the thing itself had arrived ahead of the word, the way the best things do. That evening, Uncle Fester introduced him to the dark. Harry had spent his whole life afraid of the dark, because the dark was the cupboard, and the cupboard was where you were put and where you were forgotten. So when Fester appeared at his door after supper with a lantern and an expression of tremendous conspiracy and said, "Come and see the good dark," Harry's whole body went cold and old and small. Fester saw it. Fester was not a subtle man, but he had spent a great deal of his life being frightened for entertainment and being frightening for love, and he knew the difference between the two better than almost anyone alive, and he crouched down in the doorway with his round white face lit from below by the lantern. "Not that dark," he said gently. "I know your dark. Your dark was a cramped, cruel dark with a door somebody else could lock. That's a wicked kind of dark, and I'd like to have a word with it." "Hold up the lantern. This is a different dark. This is the dark that's been in this house for 400 years, the friendly old dark, the dark that keeps our secrets and hides us when we want hiding and holds the whole family in it like a hand holds water. This dark's never locked anyone in. This dark's a place you go on purpose. Come and see. And if you hate it, we'll turn every light in the house on, all of them. I know where the switches are. I'll blow the fuses myself. It'd be a pleasure." Harry went and saw. Fester took him up the leaning tower, up and up a spiral stair, to a small round room at the top with a single great window, and he blew out the lantern, and for a moment Harry's heart went to the cupboard and stayed there, braced. And then his eyes came round, and he saw that the dark up here was not empty. The window gave onto the whole night country, the drowned garden silvered, the crooked graveyard, the black woods, and above it all the sky thrown wide and stuffed with more stars than Harry had known the sky to hold, because in Little Winging the streetlights ate the stars, and here there were no streetlights. Here there was only the good old dark and everything it let you see. "There," said Fester beside him in the dark, pleased. "You can't see the stars where there's too much light. That's the secret of it. People are so frightened of the dark they light it all up, and they never once look up and see what the dark was keeping for them the whole time." He put a companionable arm around the child's shoulders, carefully, checking it was allowed, and when Harry did not stiffen he left it there. "Your old dark took things from you. This dark gives them back. That's the whole difference, and it's the only difference that matters, and it's the difference between that house and this one, when you get right down to it. Some places take and some places give, and it hasn't got a thing to do with how they look from outside." He was quiet a moment, and then, because he was Fester, he produced a light bulb from his pocket and put it in his mouth, and it lit up, gold and warm, and Harry laughed, an actual laugh, surprised out of him, and Fester's lit-up face was delighted. It was Grandmamma who looked at the scar. She did it on the first night before he slept, when she came up to his room with a cup of something warm and sat on the edge of his great bed and told him to hold still. She pushed the black hair back off his forehead with one crooked gentle finger and looked at the thin pale lightning mark for a long moment in the candlelight, and her bright black eyes went narrow and far away, the way they had gone over the bowl. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "Sometimes," Harry admitted. It was a thing he had never told anyone because there had been no one to tell. When Uncle Vernon was angry, it would go hot like it remembered something. He watched her face for the flinch, for the disgust, for the "you're making it up." It did not come. "I thought I was making it up." "You weren't making it up," said Grandmamma. She sat back. "You've got something old sleeping behind that mark, child. I'm not going to lie to you because I've decided lying to children is one of the great sins, and I've committed most of the others, so I know good and well how they rank. There's a bad thing in there. It's asleep. It's been asleep a long time, and I mean to keep it asleep. And one day when you're bigger and stronger, I mean to take it out of you altogether and do something interesting to it in my kitchen." She said this with such matter-of-fact warmth that it was, somehow, the most comforting thing anyone had said to him yet. "But that's a long way off, and it's my job, not yours, and you're not to lie awake worrying at it. That's the difference between us and the people who kept you. They gave you a scar to carry and never once asked if it hurt. I'm asking. And I'm telling you I've got it now. It's on my list, and nothing gets off my list." She stood and tucked the black hangings back and set the warm cup in his hands. "Drink that, it keeps the dreams sweet, and knock on the wall if you need Wednesday. She won't say she's waiting for you to knock, but she is. She's been waiting for you a long time, longer than she knows. Sleep, Harry." Before he slept, Morticia came and cut his hair. She came without announcement, gliding in with a pair of the silver scissors from the conservatory and a length of black cloth over her arm, and she found him sitting up in the great bed with Grandmamma's warm cup empty in his hands, and she regarded the wild black thatch of him with the grave attention of a sculptor considering a difficult block. "May I?" she asked. "It wants doing." "Someone has cut it before, I can see, but they did it the way you'd trim a hedge," you resented quickly, to be finished, without looking at the shape of the thing. She set the scissors down on the coverlet where he could see they were only scissors. That is a poor way to cut hair. Hair should be cut by someone who is glad of the head it grows on. I am very glad of yours, so I would like to do it properly if you'll let me. You may say no. Harry looked at the scissors and at the pale, patient woman holding them, and at the black cloth she meant to put round his shoulders, and some old wariness in him weighed the scene for a trap and found, to its own confusion, none. He had had his hair cut a handful of times in his life, always by Aunt Petunia, always with the kitchen shears, always with her mouth pressed thin and her hands rough and quick, once so badly that it had grown back overnight, and everyone had shouted about that too. No one had ever asked him first, no one had ever called it glad. All right, he said. So Morticia settled the black cloth around his small shoulders and stood behind him and began, and she did not rush, and she did not pull, and she turned his head with two cool fingers under his chin the way you turn something precious to catch the light. The scissors went snip and snip, silver sounds in the quiet room, and the dark clippings fell on the black cloth and were gathered and set aside, and Harry sat very still, not with the stillness of the cupboard, the stillness that hoped to be overlooked, but a new stillness, the stillness of a creature being tended and deciding cautiously to allow it. There, she said at last, and held up a black-backed mirror so he could see. Better, now the child shows. Before he was hiding under all that, and it seems to me you've done enough hiding for one small life. Harry looked at himself in the dark mirror. The lightning scar showed plain now on his forehead, and his green eyes showed, and his face showed, thin still, but his, unhidden, in a warm room in a house on a hill. He touched the neat edge of his own hair where her scissors had been kind. Thank you, he said, and then, because the day had loosened something in him and the words came before he could fold them small and put them away, nobody ever, you didn't have to do that. I know I didn't have to, said Morticia, gathering the black cloth and its dark harvest, folding it with care, because even the clippings of a wanted child were not to be dropped carelessly on a floor. That is precisely why it counts. The things one has to do count for very little, Kara. It is the things one chooses freely for no reason but love that make a family. Your aunt fed you because the law required it and grudged you every bite. I cut your hair because I wished to and would have fought anyone who tried to stop me. She bent and pressed her cool lips very lightly to the top of his newly neat head, a benediction gone almost before it landed. Sleep now. You are the best thing this house has taken in 100 years, and it has taken in some very fine things. In the morning there will be breakfast, and it will be yours, and your name will be on the chair. Good night, my raven's brother. She drew the door to behind her and did not close it all the way, because a boy who had been shut in should be the one to decide whether a door was shut, and Harry lay back in the great four-postered dark with his hand on the neat edge of his hair, and listened to the house settle around him, and far below, faint through the old floors, Lurch had sat down at the harpsichord and was playing something slow and vast and not sad. A great grave music that moved up through the beams of the house the way warmth moves up through a body, and Harry lay in the middle of it, held, and did not once think of the cupboard, and this was how the first day ended in the house that was his. The flinch came the next morning over a broken cup. He had been up since before dawn because he did not yet know how to be a person who slept in, and he had gone down to the kitchen because he did not yet know how to be a person who waited to be fed, and he had thought, in the muddled logic of a child trying to earn a place he had already been given, that if he made himself useful, if he had breakfast started before anyone came down, then perhaps they would keep him one more day. So he had climbed on a chair to reach the cups, and the cup was heavier than he expected, or his hands were shakier, and it slipped, and it fell, and it broke on the flagstones into a great many pieces with a sound that filled the whole kitchen. Harry was off the chair and on his knees on the stone before the last piece stopped spinning, gathering the shards into his hand with quick practiced desperation, cutting his palm and not noticing, saying the words, the old words, the cupboard words, fast and low and automatic. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I'll fix it, I'll pay for it, I'm sorry, please, I'm sorry. And he made himself as small as he could on the kitchen floor, and he waited for the blow or the shouting or the hand on his collar hauling him toward the dark, because that was what a broken cup bought you, that was the price, he knew the price, he had always known the price. The blow did not come. What came instead was Gomez Addams, who had been in the doorway and who crossed the kitchen and did not grab him and did not shout, but knelt down on the cold flagstones beside him, in his good pinstripe trousers among the broken china, and gently took Harry's cut hand and opened the small fist and looked at the shard marks and the blood, and said, in a voice with no anger in it anywhere, "You've hurt yourself. May I?" And when Harry did not pull away, Gomez took his own black handkerchief and pressed it to the cut, unhurried, tender, a large, clumsy man being as careful as he had ever been about anything. It's only a cup, Gomez said. We have hundreds. Most of them are hideous. They were wedding presents. We've been trying to get rid of them for years. You've done us a kindness. He wrapped the handkerchief round Harry's palm and held it there. But that is not the important thing. The important thing, Harry, and I want you to hear me, is that no one in this house will ever hurt you for breaking something. Not a cup, not a window, not a bone, not a rule. You cannot break anything here badly enough to lose your place. There's no price. You already paid it once a long time ago, more than anyone should ever have to pay, and it is paid, and you are ours, and it does not come up for renewal. He looked at the child on the floor, at the flinch still living in the small body, at the readiness to be struck that 6 years had built into him bone deep. It's going to take you a while to believe that. That's all right. I'll tell you again tomorrow. I'll tell you every day. I have nothing but time, and I have decided to spend all of it on you. Harry looked down at his wrapped hand in Gomez's large, careful ones, on the floor of the warm kitchen among the broken china, and he did the thing he had not done in the cupboard, the thing he had taught himself out of years ago, the thing that got you noticed. He cried. He cried the way a dam cries when it finally goes, all at once in years' worth, and Gomez did not tell him to stop and did not tell him to be quiet and did not send him anywhere, but sat down on the cold floor and gathered him in carefully, checking that it was allowed. And when Harry did not pull away, he held him, a shaking child in a great dark kitchen, and Gomez wept too, unashamed, because Gomez wept at everything, and this was worth weeping at more than anything had been in years. Grandmamma came in and saw and went out again and shut the door so they would not be disturbed, and put her back against it, and stood guard over the sound of a child finally allowed to make it. Later, when he had stopped and been fed again and had his hand properly bound by Grandmamma with something green that stung and then stopped hurting entirely, Wednesday found him in the window seat of his room, looking out at the graveyard, and she climbed up into the other end of the sill without asking, because they were past asking now, and sat with her knees drawn up, and for a while neither of them said anything. "You cried," she observed eventually. She said it how she said everything, flatly, without judgment, a fact laid on the table between them. "I'm not supposed to," Harry said. The old rule, spoken aloud, sounded stranger out here in the light than it had ever sounded in the cupboard. "You are here," said Wednesday. "That was a rule for a different house. That house is gone. You can make new rules now or use ours. Ours are good." She looked out at the leaning stones. "I don't cry, but that's not a rule. That's just how I'm built." "You're built to cry, it seems, and that's fine. It's even useful. It lets things out that otherwise sit in you and rot. My brother's built to blow things up. My uncle's built to conduct electricity. Everyone here is built for something, and it's usually alarming, and we let each other do it, because a family that won't let you be what you are isn't a family. It's just people who share a cupboard." She turned her head and looked at him. "You're built to feel things all the way down, and to notice small kindnesses and remember them, and to be brave in a quiet way that doesn't show. I saw all of that in the vision. It's why I came for you and not some other boy in some other cupboard. There are a great many boys in cupboards. I only saw one who was worth the drive." Harry considered this. He looked down at his bound hand and out at the crooked stones and up at the strange leaning house that was his now, and he said, testing the shape of a joke, which was a thing he had never once had the safety to do, "The graveyard really is the best part, isn't it?" Wednesday looked at him. Something moved in her river ice eyes, some small cold spark of recognition, kin finding kin. "Yes," she said, "you'll do." And they sat in the window together as the short gray day went down over the drowned garden, and the crow on the tall stone finally stirred and lifted and flew. And somewhere below them in the house a butler was fitting the first measurements for an iron lock, and a grandmother was already cooking tomorrow's more, and a father was telling a mother in their room in a voice thick with weeping, about the cup and the floor and the crying, and the mother was listening. And neither of them was saying the thing they were both thinking, which was that the child had cried at last, which meant the child had begun to believe he was safe enough to, which meant it had begun, the long, slow work of undoing 6 years in the dark, and they had time, they had nothing but time, they had a whole house full of it, and they meant to spend every hour on him. Harry slept that night with his door unlocked, because the lock was not fitted yet, and for the first time he was not afraid of the unlocked door, because he had knocked twice on the shared wall before he lay down, and twice it had knocked back, and he understood at last, drifting off in the great four-postered dark, what the knock meant. It meant, "I'm here." It meant, "You're not in the dark alone anymore." It meant, in the plain, flat language of a girl who did not waste words, "You were seen and you were come for and you are kept." He slept the whole night through and did not dream of the cupboard, and in the morning there was breakfast waiting and his name was still on the chair. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, Kindred the shelf filled, the way Wednesday had said it would. It happened so gradually that Harry did not notice it happening, which is the way with the best changes. By the second spring it held a raven's skull that Pugsley had given him, and 3 jars of interesting soil, and a fencing trophy shaped like a scorpion, and the jam jar which stood in the place of honor at the center, though the spider that had come from Surrey had long since died of great old age and been buried with full ceremony in the pet corner of the cemetery, under a stone the size of a thumbnail that Lurch had carved. There were new spiders now. There were always new spiders. Harry had a way with them. He had grown. That was the plainest thing and the thing the family remarked on least, because to remark on it might have made him self-conscious, and so instead they simply widened the notches on the kitchen doorframe where Grandmamma marked the children's heights and said nothing, and were fierce and private about it. The child who had come to them the size of a child of 4 was, by the 3rd year, the ordinary size of the ordinary boy he had never been allowed to be, and then a little larger because Grandmama's war on his empty places had been total and had been won. His voice had changed too, not in pitch but in use. He asked things now without bracing first. He said no when he meant no, and had learned that no was a door that stayed shut when he shut it. He argued with Pugsley over the rules of games and with Wednesday over nothing at all, the pure luxurious arguing of the safe, and he had opinions, a great many opinions, about the correct way to fall downstairs and the best graves for thinking in and whether Fester's explosions were improving, and he offered these opinions at the great table without once being told that no one had asked, because in that house someone had always asked. The flinch was mostly gone. It came back sometimes when he was tired or when a plate broke unexpectedly, or once when a substitute at the village post office raised his voice, and the whole family had certain looks they gave one another when it came back, and certain quiet ways of standing near him until it passed, but it came back less each year. 6 years in the dark did not undo in a season. It undid the way the ivy on the east wall grew, slowly and in its own strange direction, and the point was not that it was fast but that it was happening at all, and would keep happening because the house had decided it would. Gomez taught him to fence. This was not a small thing. Fencing in the Addams house was not a sport but a language, the language Gomez spoke when he had too much love in him to hold, and he had taught Wednesday and Pugsley to fence before they could properly walk, and he approached the teaching of Harry with a solemn joy that would have been comic if it had not been so complete. En garde does not mean defend yourself, Gomez told him in the long gallery they used for it, sabers glinting under the portraits. That is the common error. En garde means be present. It means here I am and I am ready and I am not afraid. It is the most important thing a body can learn to say, and most bodies never learn it. They go through their whole lives apologizing, taking up as little room as they can. He put the blade in Harry's hand and closed the small fingers round the grip. You know something about apologizing with your body, don't you, my boy? You came to us bent like a question mark. Well, a saber is a straight line. Let us practice standing like one. And they did for hours, over months, over years. Harry was clumsy at first, and then less clumsy, and then somewhere in the 3rd year, quick and light and cunning, a small opponent who used his size, who had learned in a cupboard to read the smallest shift of a larger body and now put that terrible schooling to joyful use, so that Gomez found himself, one bright cold afternoon, actually pressed, actually working. And disarmed his adopted son with a laugh of pure delight and then dropped his own blade on purpose and let the child's point come to rest against his heart. There, Gomez said, breathless, beaming down the length of Harry's saber. You have me, do you feel it? That is not the cupboard talking, that is you. You stood like a straight line and you came forward and you took the space and no one fell and no one shouted, and here we both are, more alive than we were an hour ago. He put the flat of the blade gently aside and clapped Harry on both shoulders. That is what it is for all of it, not the winning, the being present. You are here, Harry, you are so entirely here. It took your mother and me the longest time to be sure you would let yourself arrive, and here you are arrived and guard ready. His eyes brimmed because they always did. Again, said Harry, and meant it, and raised his blade, present, unafraid. Grandmama taught him the pot, which was not cooking, though it looked like cooking, and was not chemistry, though it looked like that too, and was in fact the old craft, the country with no name craft, passed down hand to hand for longer than there had been books to write it in. Harry took to it. This surprised no one but Harry. He had a steady hand and a good nose, and above all patience, the deep, terrible patience of a child who had learned to wait, turned now to use that did not hurt him. He could sit with a slow brew for 6 hours and not fidget, watching the color change through its stages, adding the 3rd thing at the exact moment the 2nd thing was ready, and Grandmama would watch him work and nod her walnut head and say little, which from Grandmama was a symphony of praise. You've the gift, she told him one evening, the two of them alone in the warm cavern of the kitchen, a green brew ticking over between them. Not my kind. Mine's the old craft, the making do craft, the roots and the words and the things you learn from the dead if you're polite to them. Yours is the other kind, the wand kind, the kind they teach in that school across the invisible border where I told you were born. She did not look up from the pot. It's been coming up in you all year, little things, the spiders that come when you call, the way the fire leans toward you when you're cold and you haven't asked it to. Last week you wanted the salt and it came to your hand across the whole length of this table and you never noticed. You were talking to Pugsley, and I said nothing because I wanted to see would it happen again. She looked up then, bright-eyed. It happens again. It happens more each month. You're a wizard, Harry, a proper one, born of the wand people, and one day they're going to notice you're alive and come knocking, and when they do I want you to remember one thing above all others. What? Said Harry. That here it's a gift, said Grandmama. In that other house it was a crime. You did magic in that other house, didn't you, when you were small and frightened? Things happened around you that couldn't be explained. Harry went still. It was a memory he kept in the folded small place, the place he did not take things out of. My teacher's wig turned blue, he said slowly, and once I was on the roof of the school and I don't know how I got there. And my hair grew back overnight after Aunt Petunia cut it all off. He looked at his own hands. They locked me in the cupboard for a week for the wig. They said I was a freak. They said there was no such thing as magic and I was a liar for making things happen and a freak for the things I made happen, both at once. He had never said all of this aloud. It came out flat, the way Wednesday said things, because he had learned that flatness was a way to carry a heavy thing without spilling it. They hated it most of all, more than the eating, more than the space I took up. The magic was the thing they couldn't forgive. Grandmama was quiet for a moment, then she reached across and very deliberately took the salt cellar and slid it to the middle of the table out of his reach. "Call it," she said. "What? The salt? You did it by accident last week. Do it on purpose. Nobody's going to lock you anywhere. This is the house where the strange things are the whole point of you. Call the salt, Harry, and watch what happens in a place that loves you for it." And Harry looked at the salt cellar, and he did not know how. He had never known how. It had only ever happened to him and been punished, but he wanted it. He reached for it with the wanting the way you reach with a hand, and the salt cellar trembled and slid and came skating across the old wood into his palm as though it had wanted to come all along, only waiting to be asked by someone glad of the asking. And Grandmama laughed, the great cracked, delighted cackle he had not heard since before the bowl, and she banged the table with both hands, and she called out into the house, "He's done it on purpose. Command C. The boy's done magic on purpose in MY kitchen." And the house came, the whole clattering household came pouring into the kitchen. Gomez and Morticia and Pugsley and Fester with a light bulb already glowing in his mouth for the celebration. And Wednesday last arriving in the doorway, and they made Harry do it again. And again the salt skating to his hand, and they applauded each time as though it were the first fireworks of the war ending, and Fester wept, and Gomez seized Morticia and dipped her, and Pugsley demanded to know if Harry could make it come faster. Hard enough to hurt someone, and Harry in the middle of all of it, the salt cellar warm in his hand and his whole strange family roaring their approval at the exact thing that had bought him a week in the dark, understood something with his whole body that he had until then only understood with his head. He was safe. Not safe for now. Not safe as long as he was good. Safe. The magic that had been his crime was his gift here, and there was no house they could send him to where it would be a crime again, because there was no house anymore but this one, and this one loved the very thing the other had hated, loved it loudly, loved it to the rafters. Only Wednesday did not applaud. Wednesday stood in the doorway and watched him with her river ice eyes, and when at last the family's noise ebbed and they went back to what they had been doing, she came and stood beside him at the table and looked at the salt cellar and then at him. "I knew you'd have it," she said. "I saw it in the vision under the scar, tangled up with the bad sleeping thing but separate from it, your own light, all knotted down and hidden so they wouldn't hurt you for it." She was quiet a moment. "It's untangling now, that's good. You should let it. A thing that's held down too long goes strange when it finally comes up, and I'd rather it came up here where we can watch it than there later all at once." She looked at him sidelong. "Also, I want you to be able to defend yourself. There's an old man coming. I've seen him, not soon, but he's coming and he thinks you're small, and I want you to be able to show him you're not." "An old man," said Harry. "With a long beard and kind eyes and a plan," said Wednesday. "The kind eyes are the dangerous part, but that's a worry for later. Call the salt again. I want to time it." Their bond had grown the way the ivy grew in its own direction quietly until it was load-bearing. It was not a soft thing, and it did not look like the friendships of other children, which were loud and fickle and full of declaration. Wednesday did not declare. Harry had stopped needing her to. They understood each other in the flat economical language of two people who had each separately learned young that the world could not be trusted and had each separately decided to go on anyway, and had then together discovered that the world could be trusted after all, in this one house in each other, and that this was rarer and better than if it had been easy. They had projects. They dug in the old cemetery for the family's lost things, of which there were many, the Addamses being great losers of jewelry and occasional relatives. They performed autopsies on Wednesday's dolls gravely and wrote up their findings. They lay on the flat, cold top of the family crypt in the long summer evenings and named the constellations wrong on purpose, better names, their own names, the broken umbrella and the hanged man and the small, cruel dog. They had a pact sworn in the crypt on a night with no moon, the terms of which they never wrote down and never told anyone, but which came in the end to this: that neither of them would ever again be left in the dark alone, because there were now two of them, and two was a number the dark could not divide. And Harry gave her something too, which mattered, because a rescue that only goes one way is not a family, it is a debt, and the Addamses did not keep children in debt. What Harry gave her was this: he was not afraid of her. Everyone was a little afraid of Wednesday, even her family, who loved her, who found her magnificent and unnerving in equal measure, who sometimes did not quite know what to do with the cold, clear, terrible honesty of her, how she saw things and said them, how she did not soften. Harry was not afraid of it. He had come from a place where the smiling people were the dangerous ones, and he had learned to find safety in the ones who did not pretend, and Wednesday never pretended, and so Wednesday was, to Harry, the most restful person alive. He did not flinch from her flatness. He answered it in kind. When she said a terrible, true thing, he did not recoil. He considered it and agreed or disagreed on the merits, and this, being taken at her full strength and not found too much, was a thing Wednesday had never had from anyone outside her blood, and had not known she wanted until it arrived in the shape of a boy she had pulled out of a cupboard, and it undid something in her too, something she would have died before admitting was there to undo. "You're not frightened of me," she said to him once on the crypt, testing it the way you press a bruise to see if it's healing. "No," said Harry, watching the wrong stars. "Should I be? Everyone is, a little. It's correct that they should be." She was quiet. "You're not. I've been frightened of people who were nice to my face," Harry said. "It ruined nice for me. You've never once been nice to my face. It's very relaxing." He turned his head on the cold stone and looked at her. "You saw me in a cupboard and drove 60 miles and gave me an iron key. You don't have to be nice. You're the least frightening person I know." He looked back at the stars. "That's the hanged man, and that's his dog." Wednesday lay still in the dark beside him, and something in her that was wound as tight as the salt magic had been wound in him loosened by one turn, and she did not say thank you because they were past that, but she found his hand on the cold stone with her own and held it once briefly. How she had closed his fingers round the key in the ruined hall of number 4, and then let go, and neither of them mentioned it, and both of them kept it. The village learned to leave the Addams children alone, and learned it the hard way, through Harry, which nobody had expected, least of all Harry. They went down into the village on Saturdays, the children, to the one shop that sold the newspapers Gomez liked, and the black licorice Wednesday liked, and the batteries Pugsley went through at a rate that had made him a legend behind the counter. The village regarded the family from behind its nets the way Privet Drive had regarded them, but with more history and therefore more caution, because the older residents remembered things, and the graveyard on the hill was not a rumor to them. There was a boy in the village named Barrett who was 14 and large and bored, and boredom in a large 14-year-old is a kind of weather that eventually rains on someone. Barrett had tried Pugsley once and come away with a scorched jacket and a new respect for chemistry, and had learned not to try Wednesday at all, because there are instincts older than courage. But Harry was new and small still in Barrett's eyes, though not in his own, and Barrett had heard that the black-haired one had come from an orphanage or a cupboard or a workhouse, some soft, sad place, and Barrett reasoned in the dim way of the cruel that a boy from a soft, sad place would still have the softness in him and could be made to give up his licorice money. He caught Harry alone outside the shop, which was his first mistake, and put a hand flat on Harry's chest to back him against the wall, which was his second. 3 years before, that hand on his chest would have folded Harry up small and started the old words going. It did not now. Harry looked down at the hand and then up at Barrett's face, and he did not flinch, and he did not run, and he did not apologize, and this was so entirely unlike what Barrett had been promised that Barrett's confidence developed a small crack. "You're going to want to move your hand," Harry said. He said it flatly in the family voice, the voice with no fear in it and no heat either, just a fact set on the ground between them. "Not because I'll hurt you. I probably can't. You're twice my size. But my sister's going to come out of that shop in about a minute, and she's been looking for a reason all week, and if she finds you with your hand on me, she will do something to you that I won't be able to talk her out of and honestly won't try very hard to." He tilted his head, considering Barrett with a mild scientific interest that was worse than any threat. "She once kept a boy's shadow in a jar for a month. I don't know how. She won't tell me, but I've seen the jar." Barrett looked at the unafraid boy and at the shop door, and some animal part of him, the part that had learned not to try Wednesday, woke up and counseled retreat. He took his hand back. He said something about it being a joke in the way of boys who have lost and need a door to leave by, and Harry, generous in victory, gave him the door. "It was a good joke," Harry agreed. "Very frightening. I nearly dropped my licorice." And he stepped around Barrett and went on down the street, straight-backed, present, and did not look over his shoulder once, because a person who does not look over his shoulder has decided the thing behind him is not worth the crick in his neck, and that decision, made and kept, is the whole of confidence. Wednesday, who had in fact been watching the entire time through the shop window and had decided not to intervene precisely because she could see he did not need her to, fell into step beside him at the corner and handed him half her licorice, which was the highest honor she bestowed. "You lied about the shadow jar," she said. "Did I?" said Harry. Wednesday almost smiled for the second time in her life, and kept the moment where she kept the things that mattered, and the two of them walked home up the hill in the gray with black licorice going soft in their fists, and behind them the village adjusted permanently its understanding of what the youngest Addams was made of. Pugsley's inventions got better, and Harry got roped into them, and this was the making of both of them. By the time Harry was 9, they had a working partnership, unequal and perfect. Pugsley supplied the reckless vision and the willingness to lose eyebrows, and Harry supplied the patience and the increasingly useful habit of being able to make small objects do what he wanted without touching them, so that a wire that needed holding in a difficult place could be held by nothing at all while both boys worked. Grandmamma said it was cheating. Grandmamma said it approvingly. Their masterwork that autumn was a machine intended, in Pugsley's original conception, to launch a pumpkin over the house and into the far duck pond, for no reason that either of them ever articulated, because the reason was self-evident: it would be magnificent. It took 3 weeks. It involved a great many springs, a length of drain pipe, a car jack, and at Harry's suggestion, a small enchantment on the pumpkin itself to keep it from bursting under the strain, which was the innovation that turned a catastrophe into an achievement. On 3, said Pugsley, on the appointed grey afternoon, the whole family assembled on the terrace to watch, Fester with a spyglass, Morticia with a parasol against the light she disliked, Gomez vibrating with paternal anticipation. 1. 2. You always fire on 2, said Harry. You've done it every time since we were 6. Fire on 3 like a normal person, or I'm holding the pumpkin down. I fire on the spirit of 2, said Pugsley with dignity, and fired on 2. And the machine made a sound like a cathedral clearing its throat, and the enchanted pumpkin went up off the terrace in a great orange arc, up and up, clearing the leaning tower with a foot to spare, clearing the bat-shaped weather vane, sailing out over the drowned garden and the graveyard in a trajectory of such improbable grandeur that the whole family rose to its feet as one, and came down, dead center, in the far duck pond. With a splash that startled every crow off every stone for half a mile and sent up a plume of water that caught the last of the light, the family went, briefly, insane with joy. Gomez wept and embraced Fester, and then Lurch, who tolerated it. Morticia declared it the finest thing she had seen since the flood of '76. Pugsley and Harry stood on the terrace grinning at the ruin of their machine and the far ripples on the pond, 2 brothers who had built something impossible together and launched it clean over the house, and Pugsley threw his arm round Harry's neck and Harry threw his round Pugsley's, and they stayed like that, watching the water settle until the light was gone. We should do a bigger one, said Pugsley. We should do a bigger one, Harry agreed. Something that shouldn't fly, said Pugsley. Something that definitely shouldn't fly, said Harry, and it was in that moment, more than at any feast or ceremony, that he became truly Pugsley's brother, because they had discovered together the deepest bond available to 2 boys, which is a shared and unreasonable ambition, and a family that would gather on the terrace to watch them chase it, and cheer whatever came down in the pond. And then there was the matter of Halloween, which in most houses is a single evening, and in the Addams house is a way of life given, once a year, its proper crown. Harry's first Halloween with the family had passed in a blur of wariness. He had not yet understood that the festival was not a performance for anyone but themselves. By his 3rd he understood, and by his 3rd he was ready, and the household spent the whole of October in a fever of preparation that would have alarmed the village had the village been able to see over the wall. They carved things, not pumpkins, or not only pumpkins. The Addamses carved whatever the season had killed, gourds and roots, and one memorable year a block of ice with a heron frozen in it that Fester had found and could not bear to waste. They strung the whole crumbling face of the house with lights that Fester powered personally, holding 2 wires and grinning, so that the great dark pile glowed from within like a lantern made of a cathedral. Grandmama cooked for a week. Lurch learned a new piece for the harpsichord, slow and enormous, that he would play at midnight with the doors thrown open to the graveyard so that, as Gomez put it, the family's people could come up and dance if they were so inclined, and some years, on the coldest and clearest nights, it seemed to the children on the terrace that some of them did. Night itself, that 3rd year, Morticia found Harry standing at the edge of the terrace in the costume he had made himself, which was no costume at all, only his own good black clothes and the neat hair she cut for him and the lightning scar showing plain, and she stood beside him and looked out with him at the glowing house and the leaning stones and the whole family whirling and laughing in the dark below. You are not dressed as anything, she observed. I didn't want to be anything else tonight, Harry said. He watched Gomez sweep Grandmama into a dance that was mostly Gomez. At the Dursleys, Halloween was the one night I was allowed out of the cupboard, because they went to the Masons' party and left me, and I used to sit on the step and watch the other children go by in their costumes, all of them pretending to be monsters, and go home again to their nice houses. He was quiet a moment, and there was no grief in it, only the plain, clear look back of a person who has walked far enough from a thing to describe it without bleeding. They dressed up as monsters one night a year and were frightened of the real ones, and here everyone's a monster every day and nobody's frightened of anything except being ordinary and being cruel, which are the only 2 things worth being frightened of. He looked up at her. So I didn't want to dress up, I wanted to just be it. The real thing all the way through, and Addams, if that's allowed. Morticia was quiet for a moment, and the lights of the house moved on her pale face. It is the only costume worth wearing, she said, and you have earned the right to wear it as your own skin, which is the rarest way to wear it and the truest. She put her cool hand briefly to the back of his neatly cut head. Come and dance then, my Raven's brother, badly. We all dance badly on purpose. It is a point of family honor to refuse to be graceful about our joy. Your father will show you the steps, and there are no steps, and that is the whole of the dance. And she led him down off the edge of the terrace into the roaring, glowing dark, into the middle of his family. On the one night of the year, the whole world dressed up as what he was every day, and Harry danced badly on purpose under a house lit like a lantern and a sky full of the stars the good dark kept, and did not sit on any step and did not watch anyone else's joy go by, because the joy was his now, all of it, and it had his name on the chair. The old fear came back one winter badly, and the family closed ranks, and Harry learned what that meant. It came back because of a small thing, as it always did, a locked door. Lurch had been oiling the great locks of the house and had, without thinking, turned the key of the pantry while Harry was inside it fetching apples for Grandmamma, and the bolt shot home, and Harry was, for the space of a minute, shut in the dark behind a door he could not open, and the minute reached down through 3 good years and took hold of the child who had lived under the stairs and squeezed. They found him when Lurch, hearing nothing, which was wrong, because a boy in a pantry should make sound, opened the door again. Harry was on the floor in the corner, small, folded, his arms over his head, saying the old words, the cupboard words, sorry, sorry, I'll be good, please, and for a moment he did not know them, did not know the warm kitchen, or the walnut-faced woman, or the great gray butler crouched in horror in the doorway. He knew only the dark and the door and the price. And the family closed ranks. It was not dramatic. That was the thing Harry remembered after, when he could remember. No one shouted. No one wept, even Gomez, not then, not where he could see. They simply came, all of them quietly, and they did not crowd him, and Wednesday got down on the floor with him at exactly the distance she had judged in the ruined hall 3 years before, the distance a hurt wild thing could bear, and she began to talk, flatly, steadily, naming the true things one after another like a person laying stones across a flood. You're in the pantry, it's the apple pantry. Grandmamma sent you for apples. The door wasn't locked on purpose, it was Lurch oiling the locks. He's sorry, he's never been so sorry, look at his face, he looks like a landslide that's just been told bad news. You're not in the cupboard. The cupboard is 60 miles away and empty, and its door stands open and no one lives in it, no one, not even the dark. You're in your house, your name is on your chair, your key is in your pocket. Knock the floor twice and I'll knock back. And she rapped the flagstones twice with her knuckle, and after a long moment Harry's shaking hand came out from over his head and rapped twice, weakly, and Wednesday rapped back twice and again twice, until the rhythm of it reached him wherever he had gone and drew him, hand over hand, back up into the warm room and the ring of his family. When he could speak, when he was Harry again and not the folded thing in the corner, he was ashamed, the way the healing are ashamed of the wound, and he started to apologize for it, for the fright he had given them, for the space the episode had taken up, and Morticia, kneeling, put one cool finger to his lips. No, she said, not that, never that in this house. You did not do a wrong thing. You had a wound touched and it hurt, and you are allowed to make sound when you are hurt. We have told you and told you. There is nothing to be sorry for, there is only this. She gathered him up and he let her, and she held him in the warm kitchen with the whole family standing near, not crowding, just near, a wall of them between the child and every dark that had ever wanted him. We do not give back what is ours, not to the dark, not to the past, not to a locked door, not to anyone. You are ours. When the old fear comes for you, it does not come for one small boy anymore. It comes for the whole family, and we are a great deal more than it bargained for, and it will not have you. Do you understand? It will never have you. It will have to come through all of us, and it cannot, because we will not move. And Lurch in the doorway made his lowest sound, the foghorny Noel sound, and it meant unmistakably over my enormous dead body, and Harry held, surrounded, kept, believed it. By the summer he turned 10, Harry Addams had a place at the table that had been carved for him. Gomez did it himself over a whole season in the workshop off the second best dungeon, and would let no one see it until it was done. It was a chair, a great black chair of the same wood and pattern as the others that stood round the enormous family table, so that it belonged, so that no one glancing at the table would ever be able to tell that one of the children at it had come from somewhere else. But it was not identical, because the Addamses did not believe in identical. Identical was Privet Drive. Into the back of Harry's chair Gomez had carved over that long season, with his own hands and a great deal of quiet weeping, the whole story. A small door with a latch on the outside, standing open now, empty, a key, a spider in a web, a saber, a salt cellar with a little skating line behind it, 2 children lying on a crypt naming stars. And over all of it, spread wide, a pair of hands not grasping, open, the way Lurch's hand had opened at the car door, the way a family opens to take a person in. They gave it to him at the head of a great feast on no particular occasion, because the Addamses did not wait for occasions, they made them. Grandmamma had cooked for 3 days, Fester had prepared fireworks. And when the moment came, Gomez rose at the head of the table with his glass and his brimming eyes and said, once, a long time ago, a girl of this house looked into the dark and saw a boy no one wanted, and she said, he is mine. And we went and we got him, because that is what we do. We go and we get what is ours out of the dark. It is the family business. It is the only thing we have ever been truly good at. And tonight I want to say the other half of it, the half we have been saying with our whole lives for 4 years but have never said in words, because he was not ready to hear it, and now I think he is. He turned to Harry and lifted his glass. You are not a boy we rescued. That was true on the first day, and it is not true anymore, and I am glad it is not, because a rescue is a thing that happened to you, and I want to speak of the thing you are. You are our son. You are Wednesday's brother and Pugsley's brother and my boy and your mother's raven and this family's own heart, and this chair is not a gift. A gift can be taken back. This chair is a fact, carved and permanent. It says you were here from the beginning, even though we both know you came late, because that is how family time works. It runs backward as well as forward, and the moment we took you in, you had always been ours. He raised the glass higher. To Harry Addams, who was seen and was come for and is kept. Forever and beyond forever, which in this family is a place we have actually been and can recommend. And the family drank and roared, and Fester's fireworks went up over the drowned garden in green and violet, and a color that has no name on the ordinary side of the border. And Harry sat in the chair that told his whole story on its back, at the table where his name had been on the seat since the first hungry night, among the people who had gone into the dark to get him and would go again, and again, as many times as it took, world without end. He did not cry this time. He had done his crying, most of it, over 4 good years, and what he felt now was too large and too quiet for tears. He stood instead, small no longer, straight as a saber, present, and he raised his own glass to the strange, terrible family that had made him, and he said the truest thing he knew, in the flat, plain language they had taught him, the language of people who did not waste words on things they did not mean. I'm home. And across the table, Wednesday Addams, who had seen him first, who had driven 60 miles into the gray with an iron key in her pocket, looked at her brother standing straight in the chair she had made her family carve, and did the thing she did for almost no one, the thing that cost her, the thing that meant more from her than 100 declarations would have meant from anyone else. She almost smiled. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The letter, the first owl, arrived on a Tuesday, and the family regarded it with the polite interest of people who received stranger visitors than owls, and wanted to be sure this one understood that. It came at breakfast in through the tall kitchen window that stood open to the summer, a great tawny thing with a letter in its beak, and it landed on the back of Harry's carved chair and looked around the kitchen with the particular disdain of a creature that has flown a long way to deliver something important and expects to be appreciated for it. Grandmamma looked at the owl looked at Grandmamma. Some ancient negotiation passed between them, older than either species, and the owl wisely decided that this was a kitchen in which one waited to be addressed. There's an owl on your chair, Pugsley told Harry, who could see the owl on his chair. There is, Harry agreed. It's got a letter. It has. Fester leaned in and inspected the bird with professional interest. Do we eat it or read it, the letter or the owl? Said Harry. Either, I'm easy. Morticia set down her black coffee and considered the situation with the serene attention she brought to all disruptions of the household. I believe, she said, that this is the knocking we were promised. Grandmamma told us on the morning we brought Harry home that there was a country pressed up against this one, and that one day it would notice he was alive and come to the door. She inclined her head toward the owl. It has sent a bird. That is more courtesy than I expected of it. Harry, my darling, I think the letter is for you. Take it before Fester makes a decision. Harry took the letter from the owl's beak. The owl, its duty discharged, helped itself to a rasher of bacon off Pugsley's plate, which cost it Pugsley's undying respect, and departed the way it had come, out into the summer light. The envelope was heavy, yellowish, sealed with a blob of purple wax stamped with a coat of arms, a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake around a large letter H, and it was addressed in emerald green ink in a hand of considerable elegance, and the address was what silenced the kitchen, because the address read, Mr. H. Addams, the bedroom with the excellent draught, the second highest turret, Addams House by the old cemetery. They all read it. They read it twice. It knows which room you're in, said Wednesday, very quietly, and there was something in her flatness, some new cold edge under it, that made Harry look at her. It knows about the draft. It knows we call it that. Someone on the other side of the border has been looking at you closely enough to know which bedroom is yours and what we call the wind in it. She set down her spoon. I don't like that. I want it noted that I don't like that. Noted, storm cloud, said Gomez. But look how they've done it, Addams House by the old cemetery. They've addressed it to the truth of the place, not the postal fiction. That takes a certain quality of attention. I find I rather respect them, whoever they are, and I want to duel at least one of them before the summer's out. He beamed round the table. Well, open it, my boy. Don't leave a letter waiting. It's rude, and it's how you end up haunted. Harry broke the purple seal. The letter inside was 2 pages, and it was on its face a very ordinary, marvelous thing, an offer of a place at a school. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. A list of books with names like the Standard Book of Spells and a History of Magic. A list of equipment, a wand, a cauldron of standard pewter, robes, a pointed hat, and optionally an owl or a cat or a toad. A note that term began on the 1st of September and that a reply was expected by no later than the 31st of July by owl. Harry read it aloud and the family listened, and their reactions arranged themselves along the whole spectrum of the household. Gomez was delighted immediately and totally. A school for wizards, a castle. His boy invited to castle to learn to do on purpose and in company the very things he had been taught to do alone and in secret and in fear. A cauldron, he cried. Standard pewter, they've thought of everything. Harry, do you know what this is? This is your mother's country reaching out its hand. This is the world you were born to, offering to teach you its manners. We must go at once and buy the cauldron and duel the shopkeepers. Fester wanted to attend. Fester wanted very much to attend, had already in his head been sorted and was disappointed to learn there was most likely an age limit. But I'd be so good at it, he mourned. I already know a spell. You put the light bulb in your mouth and you think about your childhood and it lights. That's magic. Tell them I said so. Grandmama was unimpressed and said so at length because being unimpressed was one of her chief pleasures. School magic, she sniffed, turning the equipment list over in her crooked fingers with disdain. Wands, standard pewter. In my day you learned the craft from a woman in a hut who charged you a memory and a tooth, and if you got it wrong the craft took a finger and you remembered the lesson. This lot want a reply by owl and payment in gold. Soft, it's all gone soft over there. But she read the list of books twice, Harry noticed, and her bright black eyes lingered on the potion's text, and later he found the list gone from the table and knew she had taken it to her workroom to see what the soft country was teaching these days, and to judge it, and he suspected, to quietly improve upon it. Morticia was serene, which in Morticia was never the same as being unconcerned. It is a good thing, she said, for Harry to learn the shape of the world he came from and to meet others of his own kind and to be, for a while, in a place built for what he is. We have given him a home. We cannot give him his own country, only they can do that, and they should, and I want him to have it. She folded her hands. But I note, as Wednesday notes, that they know which bedroom is his, and I note the word in the letter that no one else has remarked on. She lifted the second page and read it out. We await your owl by no later than the 31st of July. By no later. There is an appetite in that phrase. They are not merely inviting our son. They are expecting him. They have been expecting him, it seems, for some time, and expecting is a thing you do to a person you believe is already, in some sense, yours. Her pale eyes moved to Harry. You belong to no one but yourself, my darling, and after yourself to this family who chose you. Remember that when you meet them. They will speak to you as though you are a thing that has been mislaid and is now being reclaimed. You are not mislaid. You were found 4 years ago in the dark by your sister, and you have been exactly where you belong every day since. The owl was not the last of them. It was, in fact, only the scout. Harry had not replied to the letter, chiefly because the family could not agree on the correct medium of reply. Gomez holding out for a raven bearing a black-edged card, Fester for a message tied to something on fire, and Grandmama for no reply at all on the grounds that making them wait was good for their character. And a letter unanswered, it turned out, was a thing the other country took personally. By the second morning there were 3 owls at the kitchen window. By the third there were 9, roosting along the dead ivy of the east wall and up the leaning tower and on the bat-shaped weather vane which they had knocked askew, each of them clutching an identical yellowish envelope, and each of them regarding the household with mounting institutional impatience. They're very persistent, observed Morticia, pouring her coffee while an owl the size of a spaniel glowered at her through the glass. I find I approve. It is the first genuinely alarming thing this school has done, and it has rather improved my opinion of it. They think we're ignoring them, said Harry, who was beginning to enjoy this. We are ignoring them. We are teaching them patience, corrected Grandmama, and threw the 9 owls a single strip of bacon to share, which was a lesson in itself, and watched with satisfaction as they worked it out among themselves without bloodshed, which she took as a promising sign for the term ahead. Let them send 100. When the whole street's black with owls and the neighbors are writing to the council, that's when a person answers a letter. Not before. You never let a thing know you were waiting for it. That's true of letters, of enemies, and of most husbands. Gomez, who had been about to object, thought better of it, and by the 4th morning the count had reached something over 40, and the leaning house wore its coat of owls like a strange feathered mourning, and Harry sat at the kitchen window among the impatient parliament of them and thought that of all the ways he had imagined the world he came from announcing itself, an infestation of increasingly annoyed owls was somehow the most reassuring, because it was, at bottom, a country that would not stop sending for a boy until he answered, and he had spent 6 years in a house that had never once sent for him at all. Wednesday said nothing during the debate. She had taken the envelope, the outer envelope with the emerald address, and she had gone to the window with it, and she stood turning it in the light, and when the family's talk had run its course she came back to the table and set it down and said, in the flat voice that meant she had seen something and had decided how much of it to share, "There's a man behind this letter." The kitchen quieted. "Not the one who wrote it," Wednesday said. "One who wrote it has a tidy little hand and a warm heart, and I don't think we need to worry about her. There's another one behind her, above her, who sent her, the way a hand sends a pen. I've been seeing him for 3 years since the salt. He's old. He has a long silver beard and half-moon glasses and eyes that twinkle, and everyone who meets him trusts him at once, and that is the most dangerous thing about him, more dangerous than any wand. She looked at Harry. He knows your name. Your real name, the one folded inside your name, the one people are afraid of. He's known it your whole life, and he made a plan for you when you were a baby, a patient, deliberate plan, and the first move of the plan was to put you somewhere small and gray and cruel and leave you there. Harry went still. The Dursleys, he said. He chose them, said Wednesday. I've seen it. He stood in a dark street on the night your parents died, and he gave you to those people himself, knowing what they were or not caring to find out, and he set something around that house, a protection, a spell, and he walked away and left a baby on a doorstep in November, and he told himself it was for your own good, and the terrible thing, the thing that makes him dangerous, is that he believed it. He wasn't being cruel. That's what your aunt and uncle were. They were cruel in the mean little way. He's the other thing. He's the thing that does a great harm for a great reason and sleeps soundly, because the reason is real and he has done the arithmetic and you came out in his arithmetic as an acceptable cost. She held Harry's eyes. He wanted you small. He needed you small. A boy who grows up in a cupboard grows up grateful for any kindness and easy to lead and certain in his bones that he is nothing much, so that when the great man finally comes to lift him up out of the dark, the child will follow him anywhere out of gratitude and never once think to ask where he's being led. Her voice did not change. It did not need to. That was the plan. We ruined it. We got there first. And when he meets you and finds you are not small and not grateful and not his, he's going to be very surprised and very gentle about it, and he's going to start at once to think of another way. I wanted the family to know that before we go. Whatever else he is not our friend. He is a man who left my brother in a cupboard on purpose, and I have not forgiven it, and I do not intend to. There was a silence in the kitchen. Then Grandmama very softly said, "What's his name, girl?" The letters signed by a woman, Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. Wednesday touched the emerald ink, but the man behind her, the one who chose the cupboard, his name is Dumbledore, Albus Dumbledore, and he's already on his way. He won't come himself, not first. He'll send the woman to look at us to see what he's dealing with. She'll be here before the week is out. Wednesday sat down at last in her own chair beside Harry's. Be polite to her, she's not the enemy. She doesn't know what he did. I don't think she'd have stood for it if she had. But she works for him and she'll report to him, so let her see exactly what we want him to know. A pause. Let her see that Harry is happy. It will frighten Dumbledore more than any threat. A grateful orphan he could use. A happy son he cannot. Minerva McGonagall arrived on the Friday as promised, and she arrived by the front gate on foot in a tartan traveling cloak and a hat pinned very straight, and she rang the great bell and waited to be admitted like a person of manners, which the family noted and approved. Lurch admitted her. She looked up at Lurch and up and did not flinch, which the family also noted because most people flinched, and she said, "Good afternoon. I am Professor McGonagall." "I am expected, I believe," and Lurch groaned, "and it meant you are," and stood aside. She was shown into the drawing room where the family had arranged itself. She took in the room, the mounted things that had never existed, the fire the wrong color, the cobwebs arranged like flowers, the disembodied hand that sat on the mantel and gave her a courteous little wave. And she took it all in with a face that had disciplined generations of 11-year-olds and did not intend to lose its composure now, though a muscle moved in her jaw when the hand waved, and she inclined her head to it gravely and said, "Good afternoon," and thing, charmed, waved again. "You have a very unusual home," she said, sitting where she was invited to sit, declining with a glance the tea that Grandmama offered from a pot that hissed. "Thank you," said Morticia. "We have worked hard at it." "I have come," said McGonagall, folding her hands, getting to it in the crisp way of a woman who found small talk a form of dishonesty, about Harry, about his place at Hogwarts. "It is customary for students raised outside our world, Muggle-raised students, we call them, for a member of staff to visit, to explain matters, to answer questions, and to accompany the family to Diagon Alley to purchase what is needed. I confess the situation here is somewhat irregular." Her sharp eyes went at Harry, sitting composed and straight-backed between Wednesday and Pugsley, and something in her face flickered, some professional recalculation. "I was given to understand that Harry was being raised by his mother's sister, by his aunt and uncle, in Surrey. That is what the records say, that is where he was placed." The room did not go cold exactly, it was already cool, but something in it sharpened the way a room sharpens when a knife is set on the table between the guest and the host, not as a threat, only as a fact. "He was," said Morticia. "Once, he is not now. We collected him 4 years ago." She let that sit. "You did not know that?" "I did not." McGonagall's mouth was a thin line. She was, Harry could see, a fundamentally honest woman running up against something she had assumed and never checked, and finding the assumption rot. "The records show him at Privet Drive. The protections show him at Privet Drive. Professor Dumbledore has assured us every year that Harry was safe and well with his relatives, that he was watched over, that all was as it should be." She looked at Harry again, at the confident, well-fed, straight-backed boy who bore no resemblance to any orphan she had braced herself to gently rescue. "You do not look like a boy who has spent 4 years being watched over. I spent 6 years being watched over, said Harry. He said it evenly, without heat, in the family voice. He had decided in the days since the letter exactly how he would speak of this, and he spoke of it now the way you describe a country you have emigrated from, with accuracy and without residence. In a cupboard under the stairs. They fed me when they remembered. They told me my parents died in a car crash and that they had been drunk and that I was a burden and a freak, and they put a latch on the outside of my door. He watched McGonagall's face change as he said it, watched the color leave it. No one from your world ever came, not once in 6 years. No one checked. The great man you trust assured you I was safe and well every year, and no one ever walked up the path and knocked and looked. My sister looked. She had a vision and she looked and she saw the cupboard and she drove 60 miles and took me out of it. That's the whole story of who watched over me. A girl my own age, from the family you find so unusual, is the only person in either of your worlds who ever came for me. He let that land, so you'll forgive us, Professor, if we are not entirely reassured by the records. McGonagall was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. The crispness was still there, but under it something had cracked open, and what came out of the crack was not disbelief. She was too honest, and Harry too plainly telling the truth, and the whole thriving evidence of him too plainly at odds with everything she had assumed, but a slow, mounting, professional horror. A cupboard, she said. Under the stairs, said Wednesday, with a latch on the outside. I can show you the memory, if your kind can do that. I've kept it. I keep everything. That will not be necessary. McGonagall took off her spectacles and pressed the bridge of her nose, and for a moment she looked her age, which was considerable. I argued against it. I want the family to know that. 11 years ago, on the night his parents were killed, I argued against leaving him with those people. I sat outside that house the whole day in the form of a cat, and I watched them, and I told Albus they were the worst sort of muggles, that they would not understand him, that that Harry deserved better. She put her spectacles back on. He told me it had to be so. He told me there was a protection that could only be anchored in his mother's blood, in his aunt, that it would keep Harry safe from those who might wish him harm in a way no other place could. He told me to trust him. And I did, because I have trusted him my whole life, because he is the greatest wizard I have ever known and has been right about a great many terrible things. She looked at Harry and her voice was quiet. It did not once occur to me in 11 years to wonder whether being safe from his enemies was the same thing as being safe. I assumed the two were one. I see now that they are not, and that the difference was a child, and that the child paid it. She sat very straight. I am sorry, Mr. Addams. It is not adequate, it will never be adequate. But I am sorry, and I am the only one who is likely to say so to your face, because the man who owes you the apology does not yet know he owes you anything, and when he learns it, he will call it regrettable and necessary, and he will mean both, and that is the difference between him and me, and I want you to know I know it. Into the silence that followed, Grandmamma spoke, and her voice was not unkind, but it was very old and very sure. Tell us about the protection, she said, the blood one, in his aunt. I want to understand the thing your great man traded my grandson's childhood for, because I know old magic, deputy headmistress. I know it better than your school does, no offense to your standard pewter. And blood magic that anchors in a mother's sister, that's love magic. That's a ward that runs on love freely given on a home that wants the child. It's one of the oldest and best there is. Her black eyes glittered. But it only works if the love is real. A ward like that, anchored in a house with no love in it, in a house that keeps the child in a cupboard, that ward was hollow from the first night. It never protected anything. It couldn't. There was nothing in that house to power it. Your great man staked a baby's whole childhood on a ward that any hedge witch could have told him was dead on delivery, because he never went and checked whether there was love in the house, because it never crossed his mind that love was a thing you had to check for. She sat back. So he got the worst of both. The child suffered and the ward did nothing, and I'll wager he's never once done that some, because the answer would cost him too much. McGonagall looked at the old woman for a long moment. No, she said quietly, I don't imagine he has. There was more to tell, and McGonagall told it because she had decided on the walk up the drive that this family would have the truth from her whole and unmanaged, whatever her instructions had been. You will have been told your parents died in a car crash, she said to Harry. That was a lie, and a small and vicious one, and I am sorry you carried it. Your parents were James and Lily Potter. They were a witch and a wizard, both of them, and they were young, and they were among the bravest people I ever taught, and they did not die in any crash. She folded her hands very tightly. There was a war on in our world when you were a baby. There was a wizard who had made himself into something terrible, who gathered followers and murdered and spread fear, until people became too afraid even to say his name. Most call him you-know-who still, to this day, 10 years after. His true name was Voldemort. She said it plainly, and Grandmamma's head came up sharply at the sound of it, because a name a whole country is afraid to say has a weight the old craft can feel. He came for your family on the last night of October, 11 years ago. He killed your father first, then he killed your mother, who could have stepped aside and would not, who stood in front of your cradle and refused to move. Her voice was steady, but it cost her to keep it so. And then he turned his wand on you, a baby, 1 year old, and something happened that no one has ever fully understood. The curse that had killed 100 grown witches and wizards struck you and rebounded, and it was he who fell that night and not you. He He was destroyed or unmade or driven out. We have argued about the word for 10 years. And you lived with nothing to show for it but that mark on your forehead. That is where your scar came from, Harry, not a crash. The last curse of the worst wizard in living memory, turned back by your mother's love, for that is the only thing anyone has ever been able to name that could have done it. The drawing room was very quiet. That is why our world knows your name, McGonagall went on. You are to us the boy who lived. There are books about that night. There are children who have been raised on the story of you, who think of you the way Muggle children think of a knight in a tale. You have been famous and celebrated and toasted at 1,000 tables every year on the anniversary, for a thing you did before you could walk and cannot remember. Her mouth thinned. And all the while you were in a cupboard in Surrey, and no one who toasted you knew, and no one who knew came, and I have to live with having been one of the ones who did not come. That is the shape of it. That is the world you were born to. It made a legend of a baby and forgot to check on the child. Harry sat with it. He had known some of it was coming. Grandmama had told him on the first night of the name folded inside his name of the bad thing sleeping behind the scar, but knowing the shape of a thing is not the same as being handed its full weight, and he sat and let the weight settle, and the family let him, no one filling the silence until he was ready to speak. My mother stood in front of my cradle, he said at last, and wouldn't move. She would not, said McGonagall. Harry looked, without quite meaning to, at the door of the drawing room, and beyond it up through the old house, toward the room they had told him about on the first night, the room with the pantry and the pallet, the cupboard 60 miles south that stood open now on nothing. And he looked at the family gathered around him, at Morticia who had cut his hair because she was glad of his head, at Gomez who had carved his whole story into a chair, at Grandmama who kept his scar on her list, at Pugsley his brother and Wednesday who had seen him in the dark. She sounds like you, he said to Morticia. It was not a small thing to say, and he did not say it in a small way. She wouldn't move, you wouldn't move either. You told me the winter of the pantry, you said the old fear would have to come through all of you and it couldn't because you wouldn't move. His voice was even. I had one mother who died standing in front of me, and I have another one who won't move. I didn't have anything for 6 years. And now it turns out I've had 2 people willing to stand between me and the worst thing in the world, and I only ever met one of them, but I think they'd have liked each other. Morticia Addams, who did not weep, who considered weeping a thing best left to her husband, who had made an art and an armor of her serene composure across a long and formidable life, put her hand over her mouth and was, for a moment, entirely unable to speak. And Gomez came and stood behind her chair and put his hands on her shoulders, and no one said anything because there was nothing to add to it, and some silences are the fullest thing a room can hold. It was Grandmama who broke it, because Grandmama's love ran through her craft, and her craft did not observe silences. The thing behind his scar, she said. You said the dark wizard was destroyed or unmade or driven out. You said you'd argued 10 years about the word. She fixed McGonagall with her bright black eyes. I'll settle the argument for you. He wasn't destroyed. Destroyed things don't leave a splinter sleeping in a baby's head. I've had my eye on that splinter for 4 years, and I'll tell you what it is, because I don't think your soft school has the stomach to say it out loud. She leaned forward. When his curse rebounded that night, a piece of him tore loose and went into the nearest living thing, which was this child, and it has been sleeping behind that scar ever since, waiting. That's what I saw in the bowl the night we found him. That's the cold that comes off the mark when he's frightened. There's a piece of your Voldemort in my grandson, and it is patient, and it is not going anywhere on its own, and one day, when it's strong enough, it means to wake. McGonagall had gone pale. That is not possible. There is no magic that could. There's a magic for everything, Deputy Headmistress, if you're wicked enough to want it and old enough to have forgotten it was forbidden, said Grandmama, not unkindly. Your school stopped teaching the worst of it, which is to your credit, but stopping teaching a thing doesn't stop it being true. It's true. I've looked. And here's the part your great man won't like when he does his sums. As long as that splinter sleeps in Harry, your Voldemort isn't gone, not all the way, and can come back, given a body in a bad year. Which means Harry is the thread the whole thing hangs by. Which is exactly the sort of fact a man like Dumbledore builds a plan around. Her old face was grim. He'll want Harry close and dependent and pointed like a weapon, because a boy with a piece of the enemy in his head is not a boy to that kind of man. He's a strategy. She sat back. Well, not in this house. Here he's a boy, and the splinter's a problem, and problems get solved. I've 4 years of study in it, and I've nearly got the way of it, and when I do I'll draw the thing out of him clean, in my own kitchen, and do something interesting to it, and then the great man's whole plan won't have a thread to hang on. Tell him that too if you like, or don't. I'd rather it surprised him. McGonagall looked at the tiny ancient woman, and at the child with the scar, and at the family arranged around him like a fortress that happened to be fond, and she seemed to reach, privately, some conclusion that rearranged a number of long-held things. I have taught magic for 40 years, she said slowly, and I came here today expecting to find a mistreated child in need of gentle handling, and instead I have found the safest boy in Britain, guarded by the strangest people I have ever met, one of whom has apparently been quietly solving in her kitchen a problem that the Ministry of Magic does not even know exists. She rose and settled her cloak. I begin to think, Mrs. Addams, that the best day of your son's life was the day your daughter had her vision. I did not expect to think that either. This has been a most instructive visit. They settled the practical matter before she left, because McGonagall was a practical woman, and the term began whether the world was just or not. Harry would attend Hogwarts. On that there was no disagreement. Even Wednesday, who trusted the place not at all, agreed that Harry should have his own country and learn its craft, and that hiding him away would only make him the frightened little thing Dumbledore had wanted in the first place. "You go," she told him privately on the stairs, after McGonagall had explained about platforms and trains. "You go and you learn everything they'll teach you and some things they won't, and you make friends if you find any worth making, and you come home for Christmas and tell me all of it. But you go as an Addams. You go knowing exactly who you are and exactly who put you in that cupboard, and you never, ever let the old man with the kind eyes convince you that you owe him anything, because you don't, and the whole plan depends on you thinking you do." And they would go to Diagon Alley to buy his things, but not with McGonagall, and not quietly, and not in the careful, managed way the school preferred for its Muggle-raised students. They would go as a family, all of them in force. "We will accompany our son to purchase his cauldron," Morticia informed McGonagall at the door in a voice of serene finality, "and we will do it ourselves, together, in the daylight, where everyone can see him. Your world has kept Harry Potter as a rumor and a record for 11 years. It is time it met him as a person with his family around him, so that when your Professor Dumbledore hears that the child has surfaced, he hears it correctly. Not that a lost thing has been found and may be reclaimed, but that a son of this house went shopping and was seen and was not alone." She inclined her head. "Tell him that when you report to him. Tell him we look forward to making his acquaintance. And tell him we know about the cupboard." Her pale eyes did not blink. "He will understand what that means in time. Everyone does." McGonagall looked at the family gathered in the great doorway around the confident boy she had come to rescue and found in no need of rescuing, and she inclined her own head, and there was in the gesture something that was almost respect and something that was almost warning for them, not from them. "I will tell him," she said, "all of it. I'm done keeping his comfortable accounts." She settled her hat. "Be careful all the same. He loves this boy in his way, which is the worst way, the way that plans. A man who fears nothing is easy to face. A man who fears for you and has decided he knows best and has power and patience and the whole weight of the world's gratitude behind him, that man is another matter entirely." She looked at Harry one last time. "You have a good family, Mr. Addams. I did not expect to write that in my report. I am glad to be wrong. Guard it. He will test it. It is the one thing he did not plan for, and the one thing he will not be able to abide, because it proves he was not needed, and being needed is the whole of what he is." And she turned and walked away down the long drive between the leaning stones, a straight tartan figure going back across the invisible border to tell an old man that his careful plan had failed, and that the child he had left in the dark had been found and raised and loved and was coming. Later, when McGonagall had gone, Harry went up to the crypt, because the crypt was where he went to let large things settle, and Wednesday came and found him there, because she always knew where he had gone. She climbed up onto the cold flat stone beside him without a word and lay down and looked at the wrong stars, and for a while neither of them spoke. Below them the house was lit and warm and full of the low sound of Lurch at the harpsichord. "My mother died standing in front of me," Harry said to the stars. "I heard," said Wednesday, "and there's a piece of the man who killed her living in my head. I heard that too. I've known about the splinter longer than you have. I told you on the first night there was a bad thing sleeping behind your scar. I don't say things I don't mean, and I don't mention things I'm not sure of." She was quiet a moment. "Grandmama will get it out. She said she would, and she's never once failed to do a thing she put on her list. You're not going to become him if that's the shape of what you're lying here not asking me. I'd have seen it. I see everything about you. You're the one thing I look at on purpose. There's no version of you where the splinter wins. I checked years ago the way you check a lock before you sleep." Harry turned his head and looked at her on the cold stone. "You checked whether I'd turn evil," he said, "years ago, and didn't tell me." "There was no reason to worry you with a door I'd already found locked," said Wednesday reasonably. "That's what family does. We carry the things you can't carry yet, quietly, until you're strong enough to be handed them. Grandmama carries the splinter. Mother carries the not moving. Father carries the weeping, which is more work than it looks. I carry the sight, which means I carry the futures, and I looked down all of yours a long time ago to be sure the cupboard hadn't broken something that couldn't be mended." She looked back at the stars. "It hadn't. You came out whole in everyone that matters. That's why I stopped being afraid for you, which I was at the start, though I'd have denied it under torture, and I'm quite good at being tortured." A pause. "You're going to be all right, Harry. You were always going to be all right once we got there in time. That's the whole reason I drove 60 miles, not to save a boy who might have been broken, to collect one who wasn't going to be and get him home before anyone could prove me wrong." Harry lay on the crypt beside his sister under the stars they had named wrong on purpose, with the weight of his true history settling into him at last, the murdered mother and the sleeping splinter and the famous name he had never asked for, and he found, testing it, that the weight did not crush him, because it did not land on him alone. It landed on the family the way everything did, spread across all of them, Grandmama's list and Morticia's stillness and Wednesday's checked and locked doors, and what reached him in the end was only his share of it, which he could carry easily straight back present. "Thank you for checking," he said. "Don't thank me," said Wednesday. "It was self-interest. I'd already decided to keep you. I only wanted to be sure I was keeping the right thing." But she found his hand on the cold stone and held it, once briefly, the old signal, "I'm here, you're not in the dark alone," and Harry held it back. And above them the wrong stars wheeled over the house that had gone into the dark to get him and would go. He understood now, into any dark at all, against anything, even the worst wizard in the world, even a splinter of him sleeping in a boy's own head, and not move. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The measure of the man. Diagon Alley had seen a great many strange things arrive down its crooked length in 1,000 years of trade, but it had never seen the Addams family, and it stopped what it was doing to watch. They came through the archway behind the leaky cauldron all together, in a loose formation that was not a formation, Lurch first because Lurch went first through doorways as a matter of physics. Then Gomez and Morticia arm in arm, then Grandmama with her carpet bag of a purse, then Fester delighting in everything, then Pugsley and Harry and Wednesday abreast, with Thing riding on Harry's shoulder because Thing had insisted, and the cobbled street of witches and wizards, which prided itself on being unshockable, went quiet in a widening ring around them. It was not the black clothes. Wizards wore black, wizards wore worse than black. It was not even Lurch, though Lurch drew the eye and held it. It was the completeness of them, the way they moved through the extraordinary street entirely unimpressed by it, glancing at the floating lanterns and the barrels of bat spleens and the broomsticks in the window of quality Quidditch, supplies with the mild approval of connoisseurs finding a foreign city almost up to standard. A world that was accustomed to astonishing outsiders found itself, for once, being appraised and did not quite know where to put its hands. "It's charming," Gomez pronounced, surveying the whole leaning length of it with satisfaction. "Look at the angles on that building, Kara. It shouldn't be standing. It's standing out of pure stubbornness. I want to move in immediately." He inhaled the smells of the alley, parchment and cauldron smoke, and the green reek of the apothecaries, the way another man might inhale sea air. "This is your mother's country, Harry. What do you make of it?" Harry looked down the crooked street, at the crowd pretending not to stare at him, at the whole improbable world he had been born to and stolen from and was now walking into on his own 2 feet with his family around him. "It leans the right way," he said. "I like a place that leans." And then a young witch near the apothecary caught sight of the scar on his forehead, plain beneath his neat-cut hair, and her hand flew to her mouth, and Harry heard the word go out from her down the street the way a stone's ripple goes out across a pond. "Potter, Harry Potter, it's Harry Potter," and the whole alley turned as one and looked, and for a moment the old cupboard reflex stirred in him, the ancient wish to be small enough not to be seen. Wednesday beside him felt it because she felt everything about him, and she said, without turning her head, in a voice pitched for him alone, "Let them look. You've been looked at by worse. You were looked at by me 4 years ago in the dark, and you survived that, and I look harder than any of these." She took his elbow briefly. "They're not looking at you. They're looking at a story they made up about a baby. Walk through it. Show them the story got up and grew and turned out to be a person. It's the most frightening thing you can do to people who prefer their legends tidy." Harry walked through it, straight-backed, present, and Thing on his shoulder turned and gave the staring street a regal little wave, and the story of the boy who lived acquired, that morning, in the space of one walk down Diagon Alley, an alarming and permanent new chapter that no book had prepared anyone for. They went to Gringotts first because Gomez believed in doing the interesting thing before the necessary thing, and a bank run by goblins was, to Gomez, deeply interesting. The goblins, it turned out, liked the Addamses. This surprised the wizards in the queue and did not surprise the Addamses at all. Goblins were an ancient people with long memories and a highly developed sense of the proper weight of things, of debts and honor and grudges kept for centuries and paid in full, and they recognized in the family that came to the counter kindred keepers of long accounts. The teller who served them, a wizened creature named Griffook, looked at Gomez's card and then longer at the family behind it, and something passed over his sharp features that on a goblin passed for approval. "Addams," he said. "We have done business with your line before, 1649, a matter of accursed inheritance and a great many enemies who were persuaded to withdraw their claims." His eyes glittered. "The enemies were never found. They never are when we do it properly," said Morticia graciously. "It is so vulgar to leave them lying about." Griffook almost smiled, which for a goblin was a landmark event, and the family's stock at Gringotts rose accordingly. They visited Harry's vault, which McGonagall had told them of, deep beneath the city, down a stomach-dropping cart ride that Fester begged to ride 3 more times, and which held, in gold his parents had left him, more than the Dursleys had spent on him in 6 grudging years. Harry stood in the little stone room full of his dead parents' provision for him, the money they had put by for a son they did not live to raise, and he was quiet, and the family let him be quiet, and Grandmama put a hand on his arm. They saved this for you, she said, before they knew they'd have to save you with their lives. Every coin in here is a coin two young people set aside believing they'd watch you spend it. Her grip tightened. You spend it, child, you spend it well, and you spend it glad. The worst thing you could do to honor them would be to hoard it like a frightened man. They didn't die frightened. Your mother stood in front of your cradle. People who stand in front of cradles don't want their sons to live small. Take a good handful. We're going to buy you the finest of everything, and it's going to be their gift as much as ours, and that's how the dead stay in a family. You let them keep giving. Harry took a good handful. And another for Pugsley, because a brother who has a vault shares it, and that too was a thing his parents would have wanted, and the family went back up into the daylight richer in more ways than one. The apothecary nearly did not survive Grandmamma. She went in ahead of them, drawn by the green reek, and by the time the family caught up, she had the proprietor cornered behind his own counter, and was holding up a jar of dried something to the light and demanding to know what he called this, and whether he knew what it did to a person taken with moonseed under a waning moon, and whether the young people of today were being taught anything at all or simply sold pretty jars. The proprietor, a nervous man named Mulpepper who had sold potion ingredients for 30 years and considered himself an expert, discovered within 4 minutes that he was in the presence of a scholarship beside which his own was a child's picture book, and by the end of the visit he had stopped defending himself and started taking notes, and he pressed upon Harry, free of charge, a set of ingredients of a quality he did not sell to the public, on the sole condition that the old woman come back and tell him more. Soft country, Grandmamma muttered as they left, but she muttered it fondly now, and she had bought, Harry noticed, a great deal and had a light in her eye, because she had found in the soft country a few things even she had not seen before, and there is no greater gift you can give a scholar of 900 years than a fact she does not yet own. They bought robes at Madame Malkin's, where Harry stood on a stool and was fitted while a pale boy on the next stool tried to strike up the kind of conversation that was really an audition, about blood and families and who was worth knowing. And Harry, who had been raised by people to whom the entire concept of who was worth knowing was a species of the sameness they found so frightening, answered the child's probings with such serene and total lack of interest that the child trailed off, unnerved, and Wednesday, waiting by the door, watched the small social murder with something like pride. They bought a cauldron, standard pewter, and Fester wept over it. They bought books, and Grandmamma confiscated half of them to read first. They bought Harry a snowy owl because he had walked past the pet shop and gone very still at the sight of her, and the family did not need to be told twice when Harry went still at something he wanted, having spent 4 years teaching him it was allowed to want. But the wand they saved for last, because everyone knew, without saying, that the wand was the true business of the day. Halfway through the afternoon they stopped for ice cream, because Gomez saw the little shop with the striped awning and declared that no campaign in history had ever been lost by an army that paused to eat ice cream, and no one could argue with that, least of all Fester, who ordered one of everything and ate it in an order known only to himself. Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor had a row of small round tables out on the cobbles, and the family took 3 of them, and the rest of the alley gave them a respectful berth and watched from behind its errands, and Harry sat with a bowl of something dark and rich between his sister and his brother and looked out at the leaning street in the gold light and felt, for a while, entirely at peace in a place he had known for 4 hours and had somehow always belonged to. "Your mother came here," said a voice, and Harry looked up to find Florian Fortescue himself standing by their table, a round, kindly man with a scoop still in his hand, looking at Harry with a soft and complicated expression. Lily Evans she was before she was Potter. She used to come in every summer before term, muggle-born, wide-eyed, wanting to know how everything worked. She favored the strawberry and peanut butter, which is a terrible combination, and I told her so every year, and every year she had it anyway and laughed at me. He set down an extra scoop on Harry's dish, unbidden, strawberry and peanut butter, and would not take a coin for it, on the house, for her. "I heard you were about and I hoped you'd come by, and I didn't know what I'd say, and it turns out this is what I'd say. Your mother sat where you're sitting more than once at that exact table, being delighted by everything. You've got her look when you're delighted. You had it just now, watching the street. I thought you want to know that somebody remembers her here and remembers her happy, and not just for how she died." Harry looked at the extra scoop, the terrible combination his mother had loved and been teased for, and he did the thing he had learned to do when a large thing arrived, which was to let it arrive. "Thank you," he said. "I'd rather know that than almost anything." He tried the strawberry and peanut butter. It was, in fact, a terrible combination. He had another spoonful and another because his mother had laughing at this table, and because a person keeps the dead in a family by letting them go on giving, Grandmamma had said, and here was his mother, giving him a bad flavor of ice cream across 11 years and the border of death, and he was not going to refuse it. She was right, though. It's awful. It's really awful. He took another spoonful, and something that was almost a laugh moved in him, warm and grieved at once. "I can see why she liked it. Fortescue's kind eyes were wet, and he pressed Harry's shoulder and went back inside so as not to make more of it than a boy could want made, and the family let the moment be, and Wednesday, beside Harry, reached over without a word and took a spoonful of the terrible ice cream from his dish and tried it and considered it with the gravity of a coroner. "It's dreadful," she pronounced. "I like her. I would have liked your mother. She had bad taste on purpose and didn't care who knew. That's the highest form of courage there is." She had another spoonful. "We're keeping this flavor. It goes on the list of family things now. Every year before term we come here and we have the terrible ice cream, all of us, for Lily Evans, who stood in front of your cradle and liked strawberry and peanut butter." She said it flatly, laying it down as law, how she laid everything down. "That's decided. Father, we're coming back every year. It's a tradition now. I've made it one. We are coming back every year," Gomez agreed at once, deeply moved, dabbing his eyes with his handkerchief. "For Lily, for the terrible ice cream. It is the finest tradition this family has begun in a century, and we have begun some very fine traditions." He raised his little spoon like a saber in salute. "To Lily Evans Potter, who had bad taste on purpose and gave her life for her son, and whose boy is sitting here in her country, eating her dreadful ice cream among people who would burn the world down before they let him go. She would be glad, I feel it. Somewhere she is glad." And they finished the ice cream, all of them, even the terrible flavor, especially the terrible flavor, at the little round table where a Muggle-born girl had once sat, being delighted by a world that would one day fail her son and then, through the strangest family in it, make things right. And for a while the war and the old man and the sleeping Splinter were very far away, and there was only the gold light in the leaning street and a family keeping a dead woman company over ice cream, which is, when you come down to it, most of what love is, the refusal to let anyone be forgotten or unfed or alone. Ollivander's was narrow and dim and stacked to its high ceiling with 10,000 slim boxes, and it smelled of dust and old magic and waiting, and when the family filed in the shop seemed to hold its breath, all 10,000 boxes attending. Mr. Ollivander was there before they saw him, how he always was, a pale man with wide silver eyes that missed nothing, and those eyes went first, as everyone's did, to the scar, and then, unlike everyone's, they did not stay there. They moved instead over the whole family, box by box, person by person, with a curiosity that had no fear in it, the curiosity of a man who has spent his life among powerful and dangerous things and finds them soothing company. "Harry Potter," he said softly. "I wondered when I would see you, and I see you have come." His silver gaze traveled over Lurch, over thing on Harry's shoulder, over Grandmamma, and something in it sharpened with interest. "Very well accompanied. How unusual, how very unusual. In a good way, I think. Perhaps we shall see." He came forward and produced a tape measure that measured on its own and set it to work, and while it flitted about Harry taking impossible measurements, he peered at the child with his great pale eyes. "I remember every wand I have ever sold, Mr. Potter, every one. I remember the wand I sold your mother, 10¼ inches willow, swishy, a lovely wand for charm work, and your father favored mahogany, 11 inches, pliable, a little more power and excellent for transfiguration." A shadow crossed his face. "It is my sad duty to remember such things on days like this. Well, let us find yours. The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter. It is not for us to choose. We only wait and watch and hand them their master when their master walks in the door." The trying began. Ollivander handed Harry wands and took them back almost at once, a growing pile of the rejected, and Harry began to understand that this too was a kind of sight, that the pale man was reading something in the flick of each wand that he himself could not yet see, and he waited, patient, present, how he waited over Grandmamma's slow bruise, and let the wands come. At last Ollivander went very still and looked at Harry for a long moment and murmured, "I wonder," and went into the back of the shop and came out with a box grayed with dust, older than the others, and opened it with a care that made the whole family attend. "Holly," he said, "and phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple. I have not offered this one yet because, well, take it, Mr. Potter, try." Harry took the wand, and the moment his fingers closed on it he knew, the way you know a key has found its lock, the way the salt cellar had known his hand across the length of Grandmamma's table. Warmth ran up his arm, and a stream of red and gold sparks fountained from the wand's tip and lit the whole dim shop like a small contained sunrise, and the 10,000 boxes seemed to sigh, and Gomez shouted with joy, and Fester applauded, and even Wednesday's flat regard softened by a degree, because a thing had come home to Harry that was his by right of blood and destiny both. But Ollivander did not applaud. Ollivander stood very still, and his silver eyes had gone wide, and when he spoke his voice had dropped low. "Curious," he said. "Curious, curious." "What's curious?" said Harry, the warm wand still humming in his hand. "I remember every wand I have ever sold, Mr. Potter, every one." Ollivander's gaze did not waver. "It happens that the phoenix whose tail feather sits in your wand gave one other feather, only one other. And it is very curious that you should be destined for this wand when its brother gave you that scar." The shop was silent. Even Thing had gone still on Harry's shoulder. Yes, 13.5 inches. You, a terrible wand and a great one. I sold it a long time ago to a young man of enormous talent and enormous appetite, and he did terrible things with it. Terrible, yes, but great. His pale eyes held Harry's. The wand that gave you that mark and the wand that has just chosen you are brothers. I think we must expect great things from you, Mr. Potter. After all, he who must not be named did great things, terrible but great. Into the hush Grandmamma spoke, and her old voice was flat and certain, and it broke the spell of Ollivander's dread like a stone breaking still water. Brothers, she said, well, that's fitting, and it's nothing to whisper about. A wand's a tool, not a fate. This one knows the splinter in the child for what it is, knows it the way a brother knows a brother, which means it'll help me draw the splinter out clean when the time comes, not fight me for it. That's not a curse, Mr. Ollivander, that's a gift, and a well-timed one. Stop making the child's wand into an omen. He's had quite enough people deciding his future for him from across a room. This wand chose him because it's his, that's the whole of it. Wrap it up. And Ollivander looked at the tiny ancient woman and at the child who had come in flanked by monsters and chosen by a wand of destiny and remained, through all of it, unmistakably and stubbornly a person, and something in the wandmaker's face eased, and he almost smiled. You are quite right, madam, he said, and wrapped it up. Quite right. I have made a career of omens, and it has made me gloomy. 7 galleons, Mr. Potter, and welcome. Whatever you turn out to be, you have turned out already to be surprising, and I find, at my age, that I prefer surprising to great. They were coming out of Ollivander's into the late gold light of the alley when the old man was suddenly there, and no one had seen him arrive. That was the first thing Harry noticed, and the thing that made the back of his neck prickle, that a person did not simply appear on a crowded street, and yet here he was, as though he had been standing there all along, and the street had only just agreed to show him. He was very tall and very old, in robes of a deep midnight blue sewn with little silver stars, with a beard and hair of silver white long enough to tuck into his belt, and half-moon spectacles, and a long crooked nose that had clearly been broken more than once, and eyes of a pale, kindly, twinkling blue that found Harry at once and warmed at the sight of him. Wednesday's hand closed on Harry's wrist. She did not say anything. She did not need to. He knew this face. He had been hearing it described for 3 years, in the flat, certain voice of a sister who did not waste words. An old man with a long silver beard and half-moon glasses and eyes that twinkle, and everyone who meets him trusts him at once, and that is the most dangerous thing about him. Harry, said Albus Dumbledore warmly, as though greeting a long-loved grandson. Harry Potter, my dear boy, how you have grown. I would have known you anywhere. You have your mother's eyes. His gaze moved over the family, unhurried, benevolent, and if the sight of them troubled him, he did not show it. He showed only a mild, twinkling interest, the interest of a man who has decided in advance to be charmed. And you must be the Addamses. I have heard a great deal about you this past week. Minerva's report was most vivid. I am Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts. I have looked forward to this meeting for 11 years, though I confess I imagined it happening rather differently. I'm sure you did, said Morticia. There was a silence. Dumbledore let it stretch gently and then smiled into it. Perhaps, he said, we might speak somewhere quieter. There is a great deal to discuss, and a public street is no place for it. I have taken the liberty of arranging a private room at the Leaky Cauldron. Harry and I have much to say to one another, and I hoped, Harry and you, said Wednesday, have nothing to say to one another that Harry's family will not hear. She said it flatly, and she stepped, as she said it, half in front of her brother, small and upright in her black dress, her river-ice eyes fixed on the old man's twinkling ones, and for the first time the twinkle paused fractionally, the way a clock pauses when a hand is laid against its pendulum, because Albus Dumbledore had spent a long life reading people at a glance and finding the lever that moved them, and he looked down now at an 11-year-old girl and found, looking back at him, something he could not read at all, something that had read him first. You must be Wednesday, he said, recovering kindly. The one who had the vision. I owe you a great debt, my dear. You found Harry when you had lost him, said Wednesday. On purpose, in a cupboard. Yes, let's talk in your private room, headmaster, all of us. I'd like you to explain the cupboard to my father. He's been very patient about it, and he isn't, as a rule, a patient man. It's the thing I most admire about him this week. The private room at the Leaky Cauldron was small and low-beamed, and the family filled it the way they filled everything, so that Dumbledore, sitting at the head of the little table, found himself somehow surrounded, though no one had moved with any menace. Gomez leaned in a corner, unusually silent, and the silence of a usually loud man is a heavy thing. Morticia sat and folded her hands and watched. Grandmamma took the chair nearest Dumbledore and studied him how she studied a difficult ingredient. Harry sat with Wednesday beside him and thing on the table between them still. Dumbledore folded his long fingers and regarded them all with grandfatherly patience and began, and his voice was warm and reasonable, and it was, Harry understood, the most dangerous thing in the room, more dangerous than any wand, exactly as Wednesday had always said. I know how it must look, he said gently. Believe me, I do, and I will not insult you by pretending the years Harry spent with his aunt and uncle were happy ones. Minerva has told me what Harry told her, and I do not doubt it, and it grieves me more than I can say. He looked at Harry, and the grief in the old face was real. That was the terrible part. I placed you there, Harry, myself, on the night your parents died. Must tell you why, because you are old enough now to understand it, and because it was not cruelty, whatever it looked like from inside that cupboard. It was necessity, the hardest kind. Explain the necessity, said Morticia, to those of us who kept him. When Voldemort fell, said Dumbledore, and the family did not flinch at the name though half the wizarding world would have, he was not destroyed, diminished, scattered, but not gone. I knew it that night, and I have known it every day since. He will return. It is not a question of if but of when, and when he returns, he will come for Harry first, because of the prophecy that bound them, because of the mark on Harry's brow, because Harry is the one soul in the world with the power to end him. His blue eyes were steady. I needed Harry to survive to face that, above all else. There was a magic available to me that night, old and deep, anchored in his mother's sacrifice and her blood, a protection I could seal to Harry so long as he could call his mother's blood home, so long as he lived where her blood lived, with her sister. While Harry could call Privet Drive home, no follower of Voldemort could touch him there. It was the safest place in Britain. It was the only place that magic could hold. He spread his hands. I chose Harry's life and the world's over Harry's comfort. It was a terrible choice. I have not slept easily under it, but I would make it again, because the alternative was to lose him, and to lose him is to lose everything. That is the necessity. I am sorry for what it cost. I did not know how much it would cost, but I would pay it again. The room was quiet, and then Grandmama laughed once, short and hard, without any humor in it, and everyone looked at her. That's a beautiful speech, she said. You've had years to polish it, and it shows. There's just one thing wrong with it, headmaster, and it's the thing at the very bottom, the stone the whole cathedral's built on, and once I kick it out, the rest comes down. She leaned toward him. The blood ward, the love magic. You anchored it in the aunt's house in the mother's sister on the theory that her blood would hold it. But a love ward doesn't run on blood, and you know it, or you should at your age with your learning. It runs on love, on a home that wants the child, freely. That's the whole engine of it, the oldest magic there is, the same magic that saved him in his cradle, his mother's love standing in front of him. It only holds if the house holds him. Her black eyes bored into the old man. And that house never held him. That house kept him in a cupboard. There was no love in it for him, not a drop, not on any night in 6 years. Which means your ward was hollow from the very first. It never protected him from anything. It couldn't. You built the safest place in Britain on a foundation that wasn't there, and you never once went to check whether the foundation was there, because it never crossed your mind to wonder whether they loved him. You assumed blood was enough. Blood is never enough. If blood were enough, we wouldn't have had to drive 60 miles to get him, because blood was right there in Surrey, and blood put a latch on his door. Dumbledore did not answer at once. That was the moment Harry watched most closely and remembered longest. The moment the old man did not have a warm, reasonable answer ready. The moment the twinkle went out of the blue eyes and something older and more tired looked out from behind them. Something that had, perhaps in 11 years, at 3 in the morning on the bad nights, done the very sum Grandmama had just done aloud, and had put it away unfinished because the answer cost too much. If what you say is true, Dumbledore said slowly, then Harry has been unprotected for 11 years, and I have been a fool, and worse than a fool. That is a great deal to accept on the word of, he glanced at Grandmama and chose his next word with visible care, a practitioner of a tradition I do not know. You can accept it or not, said Grandmama, sitting back. The ward's hollow either way. Truth doesn't wait for your permission. But here's the part you'll want to attend to, because it's the part that changes your plans, and I can see you already rearranging them behind those kind eyes. She folded her hands. Harry's protected now, better than your ward ever managed, because there's a house full of people who love him, chose him, went into the dark and got him, would go again against anything, you included. And that's not a metaphor, headmaster. That's the live magic, the real ward, the same kind you tried to build and couldn't, because you can't build it. It isn't built, it's given. And it's been given to that boy every day for 4 years, freely, by people with no blood claim on him at all, which is the purest form of it there is. He's warded to the bone. You want to keep Harry safe for the war you see coming. He already is. We did what you couldn't. You're welcome. Dumbledore looked at the old woman, and then for a long moment at Harry, at the straight back, the steady eyes, the wand of destiny in his pocket, and his family ranged around him like standing stones. And Harry saw the old man see it, see the whole of it, the thriving, unsmall, ungrateful son where he had planned to find a pliable orphan. And Harry saw him begin, gently, immediately, exactly as Wednesday had promised, to think of another way. You have clearly given Harry a great deal, Dumbledore said at last, and his voice was warm again, the tiredness folded away, the twinkle relit. More than I gave him, I will carry that, but I must be honest with you all as you have been honest with me, and honesty compels me to say this. He turned his kindly gaze on Harry directly. The danger to you, Harry, is real. Voldemort will return, and there is a piece of him in you. Oh yes, I know of it. I have known longer than your grandmother has, and it binds you to a fate that no amount of love can simply dissolve. You are, whether any of us wish it, the fulcrum on which a war will turn, and when that war comes, you will need more than a loving home. You will need training and guidance and the counsel of those who understand the enemy, and protections that a family, devoted as it is, cannot provide. I can give you those things, I am, I say without vanity, the one man Voldemort ever feared. Your family loves you, I do not doubt it, but love did not stop him the first time until it had cost your mother her life, and it will not stop him the second time either. The kindly eyes held Harry's, and beneath the kindness was iron, and the iron was the true message. You will come to Hogwarts, and at Hogwarts I am afraid you will be, to some necessary degree, in my care. There are things that must be done to keep you alive that only I can oversee. I would far rather do them with your family's blessing than without it, but they will be done. The stakes are simply too high for anything else, I hope you understand. And there it was, laid at last on the little table between them, gently wrapped in concern absolute, the threat, not a raised wand, a raised claim. The old man's soft insistence that Harry was too important to belong to anyone, that the war made him property, that love was well and good, but the headmaster would be overseeing things now, thank you, in Harry's own best interest, whether the family blessed it or not. The room went cold, and this time it was not the ordinary cool of the Addamses. This time Morticia rose. "Headmaster," she said, and her voice was very quiet and very level, and every person in the room leaned toward it despite themselves. "You have explained your necessity, and I have listened, and I will now explain ours, and you would do well to listen as closely as we listen to you, because I am going to say it only once." She placed her pale hands flat on the little table. "You are correct that a war is coming for our son. You are correct that he will need training and counsel and protection. You are wrong, entirely and dangerously wrong, about one thing only, and it is the thing on which everything turns, and it is this. You believe that because Harry is important, he cannot be free. You believe that because the world needs him, the world may own him. You look at a child with a hard fate, and you see a weapon that must be kept sharp and kept close and pointed in the right direction, and you have spent 11 years arranging his life around that fate, first in a cupboard to keep him humble, now in your care to keep him ready, and at no point, headmaster, in all your necessity, have you once asked what Harry wants, because it did not occur to you that it mattered, because a weapon is not asked what it wants." She leaned in, and her dark eyes did not blink. "We are going to teach you that it matters. Harry will come to your school because he wishes to, and he will learn what it can teach him because he chooses to. And he will come home for every holiday, to the family that will be, always, whatever befalls, the thing that comes first. You will not oversee him. You will teach him if he consents to be taught, and you will earn every day from scratch with no credit for the past, whatever trust he decides to extend to you. And the first time, headmaster, the very first time you attempt to arrange our son's life over his head for his own good, as you did on a doorstep in November 11 years ago, we will come for him, all of us, out of whatever dark you have tucked him into, exactly as we did in Surrey." She straightened. "We have never lost anything we decided to keep. We do not intend to begin with a wizard, whatever his powers. Do you understand me, Albus Dumbledore? I would so like to be sure that you understand me." Dumbledore looked up at the pale woman standing over him in the cramped low room, and around at the silent family, at the wild quiet husband in the corner, and the ancient scholar at his elbow, and the disembodied hand on the table with its fingers spread, and last of all at the child, at Harry, who sat straight-backed and steady and entirely unafraid, meeting the old man's gaze with his mother's green eyes and none of his mother's fear, and something in the great wizard's face for just a moment was not sure of itself, and had not been unsure of itself in a very long time. "I understand," he said quietly, "that I have made a mistake in you all. I am not yet certain of its size." He rose and inclined his silver head, courteous to the last, and the courtesy was real, and so was the recalculation behind it. "We will speak again, I think. There is more here than I foresaw." His twinkling eyes came to rest one final time on Wednesday, who had not looked away from him once, who had read him at the door and gone on reading him, and for the first time in the meeting the old man addressed her directly, and there was in his voice something that was almost fear and almost hope and entirely wary. "You see a great deal, Miss Addams. I wonder what you see for Harry, and for me." "I see," said Wednesday, "that you're already planning your next way, because that's what you are, a man who always has a next way. And I see that it won't work because you keep making the same mistake over and over, the one you made on the doorstep. You keep thinking Harry is alone. He was once, you saw to that. He isn't now, and he never will be again, and every plan you build on the idea that you can get him by himself in the dark is going to fail the same way, because we will always, always be there first." She held his gaze, unblinking, 11 years old and older than the room. "You asked what I see for you, headmaster. I see a man who's going to spend the next several years learning, very slowly and against his will, that love is not a weakness in the design. It's the part he left out. And it's going to beat him, not because it's stronger than his power, because it never gets tired and it never gives up what's its, and it was here before he arrived and it will be here after he's gone." She folded her hands. "Enjoy the walk back. It's a long one when you've just found out you're not the cleverest thing in the room." Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The family closes ranks. Harry went to Hogwarts on the 1st of September, and for a while it was everything a country ought to be to a boy who had been stolen from it. He wrote home twice a week, long letters carried by the snowy owl, whom he had named Bane after a headstone he liked, and the letters came back to the family full of moving staircases, and a ceiling that mirrored the sky, and a game played on broomsticks that Gomez read aloud at the table with tears of pride streaming into his mustache. Harry was sorted after a long conversation with the hat that he declined to repeat to anyone but Wednesday, and the hat put him in a house whose name did not matter to the family, because the family had exactly one house and Harry was in it whatever any hat said. He made friends cautiously, how he did everything, a red-haired boy with a good heart and a clever girl who reminded him a little of Grandmama in 50 years. He was, for the first time in his letters, simply a boy at school, and the family read the ordinariness of it like poetry because they knew what it had cost to get him there. But by November the letters changed in a way only Wednesday caught at first because she read them not with her eyes but with the other thing. "The splinter's stirring," she said one evening, laying the latest letter flat on the table, smoothing it, her river ice eyes far away. "He doesn't say so, he doesn't know it in words yet. But it's in how he writes now. His hand's changed, there's a cold coming off the paper that wasn't there in September." She looked up at Grandmama. "Something at that school is waking it. There's a dark thing there close to him, feeding it, calling to it, the piece of the enemy calling to the whole. His scar's hurting more. He's hiding that too because he doesn't want us to worry, which is the one bad habit the cupboard left him that we never quite broke." Her jaw was tight. "It's getting stronger, Grandmama. The splinter, it's not going to wait until he's grown the way you hoped. Something's hurried it along." Grandmama took the letter and held it and closed her eyes and was quiet for a long moment, and when she opened them again they were grim. "She's right," she said. "I can feel it in the ink. There's a bad old magic up at that castle this year, and it's woken the splinter early, and if we leave it in him it'll do what it's been waiting all his life to do. It'll grow, and it'll open the door for the rest of the thing to come back through, and it'll use my grandson's own head to do it." She set the letter down. "It's time. I've had 4 years' study and I've got the way of it, and I'd rather have had 4 more, but the thing hasn't asked my leave and it won't. We take it out. Soon. Before it's rooted too deep to draw." She looked around the table at the family. "And we take it out here, in my kitchen, on our ground in our house with the whole family holding him, because a drawing out like this needs an anchor, and the anchor is love freely given, and there's more of that in this kitchen than in all the wands of Britain. We bring Harry home." Dumbledore did not want to let him come home. The reply to Morticia's letter was warm and reasonable and immovable, exactly as she had known it would be. The headmaster quite understood the family's concern. He shared it, but he must counsel most strongly against removing Harry from the castle, where the ancient protections of Hogwarts and his own personal vigilance kept the child safer than anywhere on earth. The stirring of the scar was known to him. It was, he wrote, a matter he was managing. There were forces at work this year that required Harry to remain exactly where the headmaster could watch over him. Any attempt at what the family proposed, some folk ritual, well-intentioned though it be, would be dangerous in the extreme, and he could not permit it, and he was sure that on reflection they would see he had only Harry's interests at heart. Morticia read the letter aloud to the family in her level voice all the way to the end. "He cannot permit it," she repeated, and folded the letter with great care. "He is managing it. There are forces at work that require our son to remain where he can be watched." She set the letter down. "He has learned nothing. He has looked at everything we told him in that little room, and he has folded it away, and he has gone back, the instant our backs were turned, to the only idea he has ever had, that Harry belongs to the war and to him, and that a family is a sentimental obstacle to be managed." She rose. "Gomez, bring the car around. Mother, ready your kitchen. We are going to Scotland." "To ask," said Pugsley. "To collect," said Morticia. "We are not going to ask Albus Dumbledore's permission to save our son's life. We asked no one's permission the first time. We drove into Surrey and we took what was ours out of a cupboard, and we are going to drive into Scotland and take what is ours out of a castle, and the castle is welcome to be as ancient and protected as it likes. We got past a latch, we will get past a headmaster." She drew on her long black gloves, one finger at a time. "Wednesday, you found him the first time. You will find him this time. Ride up front with me." And so, for the second time in Harry's life, the whole Addams family got into the long black car and set out to collect him from a place that meant to keep him. But this time it was not a cupboard they drove toward, and not cruel small people, but a castle full of magic and a great and kindly wizard who was, in his own certain way, the most dangerous keeper of all, because he did not know he was a jailer, and thought the key in his hand was a gift. They did not have to break into Hogwarts in the end, because Harry, when the cold in his scar had grown bad enough and the letters home had grown careful enough, had done a thing that told the family everything about how far he had come from the child on the doorstep. He had written, in a hand that shook, 4 words, and sent Bane flying south through the November dark faster than any owl had ever flown. The letter reached the breakfast table the morning they meant to leave. It said only, "Please come and get me," he had asked. After a lifetime of learning that asking got you nothing, that wanting was dangerous, that no one came, he had asked plainly, trusting, certain of the answer, and the certainty in those 4 words was the whole of the family's work made visible. and Gomez wept over it, and Grandmama pressed it to her heart, and Wednesday read it once and stood up from the table and said, "Then we don't make him wait, he's never once asked for anything." The first time he asks, we're already there. They were already there, that was the thing Harry remembered. He had sent the letter in the worst of the night, when the scar had woken him with a cold that no fire could touch and a whisper behind it that was not his own thoughts, and he had lain in the dark of his dormitory certain, in the old cupboard way, that he would have to endure it alone until morning, that this was his to carry, that no one came. And then before dawn, before any owl could have flown to the mansion and back, there had been a sound at the tall window of the tower, and Harry had gone to it and looked down, and seen, impossibly on the frost-white lawn far below, the long black car and his family standing around it in the starlight, all of them looking up, and Wednesday at the front with her face turned to his window as though she had known exactly which one it was, because she always had. She had seen the letter before he sent it. She had made them leave at midnight. They had crossed the whole of Britain in the dark to be standing on the lawn when he woke, so that the very first thing Harry saw, when the enemy in his own head reached for him, was his family already come, already there, already refusing to let him be alone in the dark for even the single night it would have taken an owl to fly. He was down the tower stairs and across the lawn in his nightclothes and bare feet, and no ancient protection of Hogwarts stirred to stop him, because the protections of Hogwarts were built to keep enemies out, and there is no ward in any world that reads a family come to love a boy as a thing to be kept out. And Harry ran across the frozen grass into the middle of them, into Morticia's arms and Gomez's and Pugsley's and Grandmama's all at once. And Wednesday stood at the edge of it and let him have the others first, and then, when he came to her, did not embrace him because they were past that, but took his cold shaking hand in both of hers and held it hard and said, "You asked, so we came, that's the whole of it, that's how it works now, get in the car, we're taking the thing out of your head and we're doing it at home." And that was where Dumbledore found them. He came down onto the lawn as the family was helping Harry into the car, and he came how he had come in Diagon Alley, suddenly and without seeming to cross the distance, midnight blue robes against the starlit frost, and this time there was no twinkle at all. "Stop," said Albus Dumbledore, and there was power in the word, real power, the power that had made him the one man the worst wizard in the world had ever feared, and the frost-white lawn seemed to hold its breath. "I cannot allow this. Harry, come away from them, you are not well. The thing in your scar is affecting your judgment, you do not understand what is happening to you, and these people, whatever their affection, do not understand what they are meddling with. Come to me, come inside where it is safe, and let me help you as I have always meant to help you." He held out his hand, and his old face was kind and grave and utterly certain. "I have watched over you your whole life, Harry. I know you cannot feel it, but it is true." Away from the car. And Harry, standing at the open door of the car with his family around him, looked at the great wizard's outstretched hand and did the thing that Dumbledore had never once in 11 years of planning accounted for. He said, "No. You didn't watch over me," Harry said. His voice did not shake now. The family around him had steadied it. "You watched the door of a house you left me at, and you never once came inside to see what was behind it. That's not watching over, that's watching. There's a difference, and it's the whole difference, and it's a cupboard wide." He did not raise his voice. He had learned the family way, the quiet way, menace and love both delivered soft. "You want me to come inside where it's safe. I know that castle now. It's beautiful. But there's a dark thing in it this year, close to me. And you know there is. You said in your letter you were managing it, and you left me sleeping down the corridor from it because you needed to see what it would do. You've been using me as bait, headmaster, the same as always, since the doorstep, and calling it protection." His green eyes did not leave the old man's. "My grandmother is going to take the enemy out of my head tonight in her kitchen with my family holding me. And you're going to let us go because the only way you stop us is to hurt one of us in front of me, and if you do that, you lose the last thing you've been counting on for 11 years, which is that one day I'll be grateful to you." Grateful children forgive. I've decided what I am, and it isn't grateful, and it isn't yours, and it never was, because a girl got there first. Dumbledore's outstretched hand lowered very slowly. "You do not know what you are refusing," he said, and there was something almost pleading under the power now. "The ritual your grandmother proposes has not been attempted in 100 years. It could kill you. The piece of Voldemort in your scar is anchored to your very soul. To draw it out is to risk drawing out more than the splinter. I have studied this. I have spent years on how to free you of it safely when the time came when you were ready under my protection. These people are going to attempt it in a kitchen tonight on instinct, and if they are wrong, Harry, you will not survive their love. You understand me? Their devotion is not in question. Their competence is. This is my field, not theirs. Come inside and let me do it properly, or you may not live to see the morning." And Grandmama, who had been silent, standing small and bent by the car in the starlight, spoke, and her old cracked voice carried across the frozen lawn like a bell rung once. "100 years, is it?" she said. "You've studied it 100 years and never dared do it. I've done it 9 times, headmaster, in 900 years, and every one of them lived, and I'll tell you why yours would kill him and mine won't." She came forward, tiny and terrible on the frost. "You do it alone, in a locked room, with the child strapped down and frightened, and one great clever wizard bent over him doing something to him. That's how your kind does everything, one clever soul and a frightened subject. And that's why it'd kill him, because a drawing out isn't a surgery, it's a tug of war, the splinter pulling one way and the anchor pulling the other, and if the anchor's just one man's cleverness, the splinter can beat it, because the splinter is patient and old and it wants him, and cleverness gets tired. Her black eyes blazed up at the towering wizard. My anchor doesn't get tired. My anchor is a whole family that went into the dark twice to get this boy and would go 1,000 times, holding on to him with every hand at once while I draw, so that whatever that splinter's got hold of, we've got hold of harder, and it can pull till the sun burns out, and it will not move him, because we will not let go. That's the ritual, Albus Dumbledore. It's not craft. The craft's the easy part. The ritual is love that won't quit, and I've got a kitchen full of it, and you've got a locked room and a strap, and that's the difference between us, and it always was, and it's the difference you've spent your whole long life refusing to learn. She turned her back on him, which was the gravest insult she could offer, and it landed. Get in the car, Harry, we're going home. The old man can follow if he likes. He might even learn something. It's never too late, though it's certainly getting there. Dumbledore followed. Course he followed. He could not do otherwise, having planted his whole self on the claim that only he could save the child, and he came to the Addams house for the first time in the black hour before dawn, and the house, which had been holding its breath since the car left, opened its great door to him, because the house had decided long ago that this was a night it wanted to see. They did it in the kitchen, in the warm cavern of it, on the great table where Harry's name had been chalked on a chair 5 years before. Grandmamma had been readying it for a day. There were candles set in a ring, and bowls of things that steamed and things that did not, and the brother wand, Harry's own Hollian phoenix, laid ready at the head of the table, because a wand that knew the splinter for a brother would help draw it and not fight the drawing. And there was the family, all of them, ranged around the table where Harry lay, each with a hand on him, Morticia at his head with her cool palms on his temples, Gomez gripping one shoulder and Pugsley the other, Fester and Lurch each holding a foot as though anchoring a boat against a tide, Thing curled in Harry's own right hand so that even the hand had a hand to hold, and Wednesday at his left side with both of hers wrapped around his, her river ice eyes fixed on his face, his lookout, his lighthouse. The first person who had ever come for him and the one who would guide him back. Dumbledore stood at the edge of it by the door and did not interfere, because Grandmamma had told him he might watch on the single condition that he lay not one finger of his power on the working, and he had given his word, and whatever else the old man was, his word was good, and so he watched, the greatest wizard of the age, from the doorway of a kitchen, as a family did the thing he had never dared. Now hear me, all of you, said Grandmamma, taking up the brother wand, because I'll say it once. When I start to draw, the thing's going to fight, and it fights dirty. It'll use his own voice, it'll say cupboard things, it'll try to make him small again, because small is where it can beat him. Your one job is to hold on and keep him big. Say his name, tell him what he is. Don't let go for anything, not if the candles go black, not if the thing wears my face, not if the house screams, and the house may scream, it's fond of him too. Hold the child, keep him ours, that's the whole of it. She set the wand's tip to the lightning scar, and the scar was cold, cold enough to burn, and she began, low, in the language older than the family and older than the border, to draw. The kitchen went dark and then darker. The cold came up off the scar in a wave, and the candles guttered to blue pinpricks, and something behind Harry's eyes woke all the way up for the first and last time and looked out through them, and it was ancient, and it was hateful, and it was afraid, and it reached for the oldest weapon it had, and it used Harry's own mouth to do it. No one comes, it said in Harry's voice, small and cold. No one keeps me, I'm nothing, I take up space, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Put me back in the dark where I belong, you're Harry Addams, said Wednesday, flat and certain, gripping his hand, leaning into his face, giving the thing no room at all. Your name is on the chair, your key is in the door, I saw you in the dark and I drove 60 miles and you are the least frightening person I know and you are mine and you are kept. That's not the splinter talking, that's not you either. That's a dead man's leftovers wearing your voice, and it's a liar, and we do not give back what is ours. And around the table the family took it up, all of them at once, Gomez and Morticia and Pugsley and Fester and Lurch's great groaning bass, saying his name, telling him what he was, a wall of voices and hands, and Harry, deep down under the cold where the thing had dragged him, heard them, heard the family already there, already come, already refusing to let him be alone in the dark for even one moment, and he stopped sinking. He stopped sinking and he turned down in the cold and he pushed back up toward the voices, toward the hands, toward his sister's face, and Grandmamma felt the child come up to meet her and she pulled hard with 900 years and a whole family behind her and a brother wand singing in her hand. And the splinter tore loose all at once with a sound like the whole house drawing breath, and came up and out of the scar in a rush of black smoke and a scream that was not Harry's and was not anyone's. A scream out of the pit of a dead man's ruined soul, and Grandmamma had a jar ready, an ordinary glass jar, the kind you'd keep a spider in, and she caught the black screaming thing in it and clapped the lid down and the scream cut off, and the candles came back gold and the cold was gone, all of it, out of the scar and out of the kitchen and out of Harry, gone. Harry opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was Wednesday's face, close, watching, and the scar on his forehead had not hurt, he understood, in the whole slow rise back up, and the cold that had lived behind it his entire life, the cold he had felt as himself because he had never once been without it, was simply gone, and the space where it had been felt vast and clean and warm filled up already before he had even sat, with the hands still holding him and the voices still saying his name. "Is it out?" he asked. "It's in the jar," said Wednesday. She did not let go of his hand. "Fester wants to keep it on his shelf. Grandmama says it's too dangerous and she's going to do something interesting to it in the morning. They're going to argue about it for a week. It's very ordinary. You're going to love it." Something moved in her river ice eyes, some deep cold spark. "You came back up. When it had you all the way down, you turned around and came back up toward us. I felt you do it." A pause, and then flat, the highest thing she could say, "That was well done." Harry sat up slowly among his family in the warm gold kitchen hole for the first time he could remember. The enemy that had ridden in his own head since before his memory now screaming faintly in a spider jar on the counter, and he looked past his sister to the doorway where Albus Dumbledore stood, and had stood the whole time and had not moved, and was looking at the scene before him with an expression no one in that kitchen had seen on his face before. An expression he had perhaps not worn in a very long time, the expression of a man who has just watched something he had proven to his own certain satisfaction to be impossible. "I could not have done that," Dumbledore said. He said it quietly to the room, to himself. "I have studied it for years, and I could not have done it, and I know why I could not have done it, because your grandmother told me on the lawn, and I did not believe her, and she was right. I would have done it alone." In a locked room, it would have killed him. He looked at the family around the table, at all the hands still on the child. "I have spent a long life being the cleverest person in every room I entered, and being right so often about so many terrible things that I forgot there were things cleverness cannot do, and forgot to keep looking for the rooms where I would be wrong." His pale eyes found Harry's, and there was no plan in them now, none, only a very old and very tired honesty. "I left you on that doorstep, Harry, because I had done the arithmetic and you came out an acceptable cost. That is the truth, and it is unforgivable, and I will not insult you by asking to be forgiven. I only want to say, while I am standing in the one place my arithmetic never imagined, a kitchen full of monsters that did what I could not, that I was wrong, not about the danger. The danger was always real. I was wrong about the answer. I thought the answer was me. The answer was this." He gestured at the table, at the hands, at the family. "It was always going to be this. I simply could not see it because I had never had it, and you cannot plan for a thing you have never once felt." The family let him say it and did not soften toward him, because some things are true and unforgivable at once, and it does no good to pretend otherwise, but they did not gloat either, because gloating was a small thing and they were, in their terrible way, large. It was Harry who answered him in the end. Harry, sitting up on the great table with his family's hands only now beginning to loosen on him, the scar cool and quiet on his brow, looked at the broken certainty of the greatest wizard of the age and felt no fear of him at all, and no hatred either, only a clear cold understanding. And he spoke to the old man the way the family had taught him to speak of hard things, plainly and only once. "I'll come back to Hogwarts," Harry said. "After Christmas, because it's my mother's country and I want to learn it, and because I have friends there now, and because you don't get to take it from me by having been wrong about me. That would be letting you decide my life all over again, just backward, and I'm done letting you decide my life." He slid down off the table and stood on his own feet, straight-backed, present, unafraid. "But I'll come back on my terms, and here they are, and like my grandmother, I'll say them once. I come home for every holiday to this house, to this family first, always. You teach me, if I let you, and you earn it from nothing, the way everyone earns everything with me now, because I've learned the hard way what a kind face is worth on its own, which is nothing. And you never again decide what's best for me over my head and call it protection. You want to protect me, tell me the truth, and let me choose, and then stand with the people who love me instead of trying to replace them. That's the whole offer. It's more than you gave me. Take it or don't." Dumbledore looked at the child he had meant to keep small, standing straight and whole and entirely his own in a kitchen full of the family that had made him so, and the old man bowed his head, the deep grave bow of a person conceding a thing he cannot argue with, and when he raised it there was, at the very back of the tired blue eyes, the faintest new thing, so small it might have been the candlelight that had not been there before, the beginning, perhaps, of learning. "I accept your terms, Harry Addams," he said. "All of them, and I will try. I make no promises I have already broken once, so I will only say I will try to be a man who deserves them." He inclined his head to Morticia, and to Gomez, and last and longest to Grandmamma, who looked back at him without warmth but without cruelty either, one old power to another. "You have done a thing tonight that will be studied, if I have any say in it, for 100 years, and taught, and I hope learned. Thank you for permitting me to watch. It is the most important lesson I have received in a very long life, and I received it fittingly, standing in a doorway, uninvited, having planned to do everything wrong." And he turned, and Lurch showed him to the door, and he went out into the gray coming dawn and back across the border to his castle, a great man made, at the very end of a long night, a little smaller and a little truer, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, unsure which was, Wednesday observed, watching him go, the most hopeful thing about him. The family did not go to bed that morning. The family threw a party because the family threw a party at the slightest provocation, and a dead man successfully removed from a beloved son's skull was not slight. Grandmama cooked the sun up. Fester set off the fireworks he had been saving for an occasion, and declared this the finest occasion of his life, better even than the flood. Gomez danced Morticia the length of the great hall and back while Lurch played, and then danced Grandmama, who cackled and let him, and then tried to dance Harry, who submitted with the good grace of a boy who had learned that his father's joy was a weather you did not fight but stood out in. Pugsley wanted to know, immediately and repeatedly, whether the extraction could be done again on someone else, ideally him, ideally soon, and whether it would hurt, and was disappointed on both counts. And Harry sat in his carved chair at the great table, whole, the scar cool and silent on his brow, and watched his family be entirely, riotously, relentlessly glad that he existed, and let himself be glad too, all the way down, without bracing, without waiting for it to be taken, because he had learned at last, somewhere in the long night, the thing they had been telling him for 5 years. That it was not going to be taken, that there was no catch, that the more was real, and the more never ran out. Morticia found him at the edge of the celebration later, when the fireworks had burned down and Fester had fallen asleep in a suit of armor, and the gold morning was coming up over the drowned garden. She sat beside him and did not fuss, though she had threatened to, and for a while they watched the light come. "You asked us to come," she said. "In the letter, 4 words, do you know, that was the thing I had waited 5 years to read. Not that you were happy, though you were, and it made us so, that you would ask." She looked at him, her pale face soft in the new light. "The night we took you out of that cupboard, you told me no one keeps you. You were certain of it, the way you were certain of the floor, and I told you that one morning you would wake and find you had believed the opposite in your sleep and forgotten to notice." She put her cool hand briefly over his. "You noticed, in the end. You sent an owl into the dark certain we would come, and we came, and the certainty was the whole of it. That is the day the cupboard finally lost, Harry. Not tonight with the jar and the screaming, the morning you asked and knew the answer. Tonight was only the paperwork. 60 miles to the south, on a quiet street where every house was the same, the Dursleys of number 4 Privet Drive were exactly as they had always been, which was, as Morticia had promised on a grey morning 5 years before, their whole and entire punishment. Vernon still went magenta at the newspaper. Petunia still watched the street through the net curtains and found its sameness a comfort. Dudley had grown to the approximate dimensions of a small sofa and had never once, in 5 years, been told no. They had a good car and a mowed lawn and a hanging basket of plastic flowers by the door, and they went to their dinner parties, and they were, in every visible particular, precisely what they had been, which was the sentence Morticia had handed down in the cruelest one available, to go on being exactly themselves forever in exactly that house. And under the stairs the cupboard was still there. They had not been able to bring themselves to use it, in the end, not for the Hoover, not for the Christmas boxes, not for anything. The latch was still on the outside. The door still stood open on the small, dark, empty space, and once a year, on a certain night at the end of October, Petunia would find herself standing in the hall in the dark looking at it, not knowing why she had come, unable to say what she was looking at or why the sight of the empty cupboard with its open door made her feel, for just a moment, before she went back to bed and forgot it until the next year, that she had once been given something rare and valuable and had signed it away for the sake of the neighbors not talking, and had gotten precisely the quiet street she asked for, and would have it undisturbed, unchanged, unforgiven for the rest of her natural life. She never made the connection to the long black car, or the pale woman, or the strange grave girl who had knelt by the cupboard that morning. She only knew that the empty space under her stairs was, somehow, the loudest thing in her perfectly silent house, and that she could not throw anything away into it ever, no matter how she tried. Some monuments build themselves. The Addamses had not needed to lift a finger. They had simply taken the one good thing and gone, exactly as they said they would, and left the Dursleys to be the punishment, which they were, thoroughly to themselves, world without end. They buried the jar at the bottom of the garden in the end, after Grandmama had done something to it that made the screaming stop for good, under a stone the size of a thumbnail that Lurch carved, next to the grave of a spider that had once been the only kind thing in a cupboard 60 miles south. It seemed to the family the right place for it, the last of the enemy who had hunted Harry his whole life, laid down at last beside the first friend who had kept him company in the dark, both of them small now, both of them past, both of them under the good earth of the house that had gone into the dark and got the child out and would never, ever give him back. Harry stood over the 2 little stones in the thin winter light, and Wednesday stood beside him, and for a while neither of them said anything, which was their way. "The old man's going to keep trying to be good now," Harry said eventually. "You can tell it's going to be exhausting for him. He's got no practice. He'll be terrible at it for years," Wednesday agreed. "Watching him learn to love people instead of arranging them is going to be like watching Pugsley learn the violin." Painful and loud and probably on fire at some point. I'm looking forward to it. She considered the small stones. You're free now, the thing's out, you could be anything. You could go and be a hero the way their books wanted, the boy who lived, all shining. She said it flatly, testing how she tested everything, pressing the bruise to see if it was healed. I'd rather be an Addams, Harry said. Heroes are alone, it's the whole job, one special boy against the dark. He looked out at the drowned garden and the leaning stones and the great black house that was his. I did that for 6 years. I was one special boy against the dark in a cupboard and nobody came and it nearly killed me and it wasn't brave, it was just lonely. He put his hand in his pocket where the iron key still lived over his heart where she had told him to keep it 5 years and a lifetime ago. I don't want to be the special boy against the dark. I want to be one of the monsters that go into the dark to get the next kid out. That's the family business. You said so the first day in the car. You go into the dark and you get what's yours and you bring it home. I want to do that. I want to be the one who comes for the next Harry wherever he is in whatever cupboard. He looked at her. There's always a next one. You saw me. Someday you'll see another. And when you do, I want to be in the car. Wednesday Addams looked at her brother, whom she had found in the dark when he was 6 and nobody's, and had driven 60 miles to collect with an iron key in her pocket, and had shared her family and her graveyard and her wrong-named stars with, and had watched grow straight and whole and unafraid, until he stood here in the winter light asking not to be saved but to save, not to be kept but to keep, which was the last proof, if she had needed one, that the child in the cupboard was gone for good and the brother in his place was made all the way through. And Wednesday Addams, who did not smile, who had almost smiled 3 times in her whole life and each time it had cost her, looked at Harry standing over the 2 small graves in the pale light, offering to spend the rest of his life going into the dark for strangers because a girl had once gone into the dark for him, and she smiled. It was not a large smile. It was gone almost before it came, a grave upward turning, the rarest thing in the house, worth more than any word, but Harry saw it. He would always, ever after, be one of the very few people alive who had, and he knew what it was worth, and he did not remark on it because they were past that, and some things are spoiled by remarking on them. You'll be in the car, she said. You were always going to be in the car. I saw it years ago. I just didn't tell you because it's more fun to watch you decide things you were always going to decide. She turned back toward the house, where the windows were lit gold against the winter dusk, where Grandmama was cooking more, where Gomez was weeping about something, and Fester was probably on fire, and Lurch was at the harpsichord, and a place was set at the great table with a name carved into the chair. Come inside. It's cold and there's soup, and you've had a long night having a dead man pulled out of your head, and Mother will fuss if we stand out here in the dark much longer. She paused at the edge of the light and looked back at him, small and upright in her black dress, the one who had seen him. Besides, you don't have to stand in the dark on purpose anymore. That was only ever for finding people, and we already found you. And Harry Addams turned his back on the 2 small graves and the whole long cupboard of his childhood, and walked up through the drowned garden toward the lit windows of the only house that had ever wanted him, beside the sister who had gone into the dark to get him, into the warm and the noise and the soup and the family home kept seen, and never, from that night to the last night of the world, alone in the dark again. Chapter 7 End.